This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. Just as I was about to give up hope of finding any civilization, I spotted a faint glow in the distance. As I drew closer, I could make out the flickering neon sign of a small motel nestled at the base of a towering mountain. Pine View Lodge, the sign proclaimed in faded red letters. It wasn't much to look at, but at that point, I would have taken just about any port in a storm. I pulled into the gravel parking lot, the crunch of stones under my tires seeming unnaturally loud in the stillness of the night. As I stepped out of my car, a gust of frigid mountain air hit me, and I shivered, pulling my jacket tighter around me. The motel was a long, low building with peeling paint and sagging gutters. A single light illuminated the office at one end. Hesitantly, I made my way to the office door and pushed it open. A little bell jingled overhead, startling me. The interior was dimly lit and smelled musty, like old cigarettes and mildew. Behind a scratched Formica counter stood a thin, pale man with sunken eyes and greasy hair. He didn't look up as I approached, instead staring intently at an ancient TV that was playing nothing but static. Excuse me, I said, clearing my throat. Do you have any vacancies for tonight? The man's head snapped up, and I instinctively took a step back. There was something off about his eyes. They seemed to reflect the light strangely, almost glowing in the dimness. Of course, he said, his voice a dry rasp. We always have room here at Pine View. He reached under the counter and produced an old-fashioned key attached to a plastic fob. Room 13, end of the building. That'll be $45. I hesitated, a chill running down my spine. Everything about this place felt wrong, but it was late, I was exhausted, and the thought of driving for who knows how long to find another motel was unbearable. So I handed over the cash and took the key, trying not to flinch when the man's cold fingers brushed against mine. Enjoy your stay, he said, his lips curling into what might have been a smile. And don't mind any noises you might hear in the night. These old buildings, they tend to settle. I mumbled a thanks and hurried out of the office, eager to get to my room and lock the door behind me. As I walked along the covered walkway to room 13, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I glanced over my shoulder, but there was no one there, just empty darkness beyond the weak glow of the motel's exterior lights. The key stuck in the lock, and I had to jiggle it for a moment before the door finally swung open with a drawn-out creak. The room was small and sparsely furnished, just a sagging double bed, a rickety nightstand, and an ancient TV that looked like it hadn't worked since the 80s. The floral wallpaper was peeling in places, revealing dark stains on the plaster beneath. I set my bag down and quickly checked the bathroom. It was tiny and not particularly clean, but at least the water ran when I turned the tap. I splashed some cold water on my face, trying to shake off the unease that had settled over me since arriving at this place. As I was drying my face with a threadbare towel, I heard it, a soft, rhythmic thumping coming from somewhere behind the wall. At first I thought it might be pipes or the heating system, but as I listened, it became clear that the sound had a distinct pattern, almost like footsteps. I pressed my ear to the wall, straining to hear. The thumping continued, growing slightly louder. It definitely sounded like someone walking, but the footsteps seemed to be coming from inside the wall itself. That was impossible, of course. I was just tired and my mind was playing tricks on me. I pulled away from the wall and tried to ignore the sound, focusing instead on getting ready for bed. But as I changed into my pajamas and brushed my teeth, the footsteps continued, sometimes fading slightly, but never disappearing entirely. It was maddening. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know what was causing that sound. I began examining the walls more closely, running my hands along the peeling wallpaper, looking for any kind of hidden door or compartment. As I neared the corner by the nightstand, I felt something, a slight give in the wall, as if there was a space behind it. Heart pounding, I began picking at the edge of the wallpaper, peeling it back to reveal the plaster beneath. To my shock, there was a small recess carved into the wall, barely visible in the dim light, and inside that recess was a key, old and tarnished with an intricate design on the head. I reached in and pulled out the key with trembling fingers. As I turned it over in my hand, I noticed something etched into the metal. "Don't trust him." A chill ran through me. What did it mean? Don't trust who? The strange man at the front desk? The footsteps in the wall suddenly grew louder, as if whoever or whatever was making them was right on the other side of the plaster. I stumbled back, my heart racing. This was insane. I needed to get out of here. I quickly threw my things back in my bag and headed for the door. But as I reached for the handle, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. Footsteps in the walkway outside, approaching my room. There was a sharp knock on the door. "Everything all right in there?" It was the voice of the man from the front desk. I thought I heard some commotion. I didn't answer, frozen in place with my hand on the doorknob. "Sir, I'm going to need to come in and check if you don't answer." I heard the rattle of a key in the lock. Panicking, I looked around for another way out. The bathroom window, it was small, but I thought I could fit through it. Just as the door began to open, I bolted for the bathroom, locking the flimsy door behind me. I could hear the man enter the room, his footsteps slow and deliberate. "Where are you hiding?" he called out, his voice taking on a menacing edge. "You shouldn't have been snooping around. This could have been so much easier." With shaking hands, I managed to wrench the bathroom window open. It was a tight squeeze, but adrenaline gave me strength as I hauled myself through the opening. I tumbled to the ground outside just as I heard the bathroom door splinter. I scrambled to my feet and ran for my car, not daring to look back. As I peeled out of the parking lot, I caught a glimpse of the man standing in front of the motel, watching me drive away. His eyes seemed to glow in the darkness. I drove for hours, putting as much distance between myself and that godforsaken motel as I could. It wasn't until the sun began to rise that I finally felt safe enough to pull over at a rest stop. As I sat there, trying to make sense of what had happened, I realized I still had the key clutched in my hand. I examined it more closely in the light of day, wondering what secrets it might unlock. That's when I noticed a small engraving on the side of the key that I hadn't seen before. It was an address, right here in Colorado. I didn't know what I would find there, but I knew I had to go. I needed answers. It took most of the day to reach the address. It led me to a small local library in a town I'd never heard of. With trembling hands, I approached the librarian and asked if they had any information about the Pine View Lodge. The elderly woman's face paled. "Where did you hear that name?" she asked. I told her an abbreviated version of my experience, leaving out the more unbelievable details. As I spoke, her expression grew increasingly troubled. "Young man," she said when I'd finished, "the Pine View Lodge burned down over 30 years ago. There's nothing left there but ashes." My mind reeled. That was impossible. I'd been there just last night. I'd seen it, touched it, slept in one of its rooms. The librarian must have seen the disbelief on my face. She sighed and pulled out an old newspaper from a file cabinet. The front page showed a photo of the Pine View Lodge engulfed in flames. The date on the paper was May 15th, 1989. It was a terrible tragedy, the librarian explained. The owner went mad, they say, lured travelers there and, well, no one knows exactly what happened to them. When the police finally discovered what was going on, the owner set fire to the place rather than be captured. They never found his body in the ruins. I stared at the photo, my mind struggling to reconcile what I was seeing with what I had experienced. But I was there, I insisted. Just last night, I have proof. I held out the key. The librarian's eyes widened as she saw it. "Where did you get that?" she whispered. "I found it hidden in the wall of my room," I explained. It had a message carved into it. "Don't trust him." The old woman's hands shook as she took the key from me. "This belonged to one of the victims," she said. "A young woman who realized something was wrong and tried to warn others, but she vanished before she could escape." I felt sick. What had I stumbled into? What was the thing I'd seen masquerading as a motel manager? And how many other unsuspecting travelers had fallen into its trap over the years? I left the library with more questions than answers, the weight of the mystery pressing down on me. I knew I should probably go to the police, but what would I tell them? That I'd stayed at a motel that had burned down 3 decades ago? That I'd been pursued by a man who may or may not have been human? As I drove out of town, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Whatever was haunting the ruins of the Pine View Lodge was still out there, still luring in unsuspecting victims. And somehow, I'd been lucky enough, or perhaps unlucky enough, to escape. I don't know if I'll ever understand what really happened that night. But I do know one thing: I'll never stay at another roadside motel again. And if you're ever driving through the mountains of Colorado and see a flickering neon sign for the Pine View Lodge, keep driving. Don't stop. Don't look back. Just get as far away as you can, as fast as you can. Because some places aren't meant to be found, and some secrets are better left buried in the ashes of the past. The guy at the front desk barely looked up from his phone as he handed me a key. "Room 13, he grunted. Great, I thought. Just my luck to get the unlucky number. But I was too tired to ask for a different room. I trudged down the dimly lit hallway, found my room, and collapsed onto the musty-smelling bed without even taking off my shoes. I was asleep within minutes. When I woke up, the room was pitch black. I fumbled for my phone to check the time, 3:17 a.m. My mouth was dry, and I desperately needed some water. I got up and felt my way to where I thought the door was, groping along the wall. My hand found the doorknob, and I turned it, but it wouldn't budge. I tried again, jiggling it harder. Nothing. The door was locked. That's weird, I thought. I didn't remember locking it before I fell asleep. Maybe it auto-locked? I felt around for a latch or deadbolt, but couldn't find one. "Hello?" I called out, knocking on the door. "Is anyone there? I think I'm locked in." No response. The hallway outside was silent. I went back to my bed and grabbed my phone, using the flashlight to inspect the door. There was no latch or lock on my side, just a plain doorknob. How was this possible? My heart started to beat faster as I realized the implication. The door could only be locked from the outside. I shone my light around the rest of the room, looking for another way out. The window was tiny and had metal bars over it. There were no other doors. I was trapped. "Hey!" I yelled, pounding on the door. "Someone let me out. This isn't funny." Still nothing. The silence was eerie. I tried calling the front desk, but there was no signal. Of course, I was in the middle of the desert. For the next hour, I alternated between pounding on the door, yelling for help, and searching every inch of the room for a way out. But it was useless. I was completely sealed in. As panic started to set in, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Footsteps in the hallway outside. "Hello?" I called out desperately. "Please help me. I'm locked in." The footsteps paused outside my door. I held my breath, waiting. Then I heard voices. They were muffled, but I could make out two men talking in low tones. "Sure this is the right one?" one voice said. "Positive," the other replied. "Room 13. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. What did they want with me? "Please," I yelled. "Let me out. I don't know what's going on, but—" "Shut up in there," one of the men growled, banging on the door. "Not a word or you'll regret it." I stumbled backwards, tripping over my own feet and landing hard on the floor. What the hell was happening? The men continued talking outside, but their voices were too low for me to make out what they were saying. After a few minutes, the footsteps receded down the hall. I stayed frozen on the floor, hardly daring to breathe. My mind was racing. Who were those men? Why had they locked me in here? What did they want? As the adrenaline faded, exhaustion took over. I must have dozed off at some point because the next thing I knew, pale light was filtering through the barred window. Dawn had broken. I got to my feet, wincing at how stiff and sore I felt. My mouth was parched and my stomach growled with hunger. How long had I been in here? I went to the door, not really expecting anything to have changed, but when I turned the knob, it opened. I stood there in shock for a moment, then bolted out into the hallway. It was deserted. I ran to the front desk, but it was empty. The whole motel seemed abandoned. My car was still in the parking lot where I'd left it. I jumped in and peeled out of there as fast as I could, not looking back. To this day, I have no idea what happened that night. Why was I locked in? Who were those men? What did they want with me? I've tried researching the desert oasis inn, but I can't find any record it ever existed. When I've driven back through that stretch of Arizona desert, there's no sign of the motel. It's like it vanished into thin air. Sometimes I wonder if I dreamed the whole thing. But then I remember the terror I felt, trapped in that room with no way out. The muffled voices in the hall, the sound of footsteps approaching my door. It was all too real, and I still have no explanation for what happened to me that night in the desert. I used to love road trips and exploring remote places, but now I stick to well-populated areas and chain hotels. I always check that my room door opens from the inside, and I never, ever stay in room 13. The desert holds secrets, and some of them are better left undiscovered. I just count myself lucky that I made it out alive. But a part of me will always wonder, what if I hadn't? What was supposed to happen to me in that room? It's a question that haunts me to this day. So if you're ever driving through the Arizona desert and see a run-down motel called the Desert Oasis Inn, keep driving. Don't stop, no matter how tired you are, because you might check in, but there's no guarantee you'll be able to check out. The motel was nothing special, just a typical roadside establishment with peeling paint and dated decor. But it would do for the night. We grabbed our overnight bags from the trunk and made our way to the office to check in. The bored-looking clerk barely looked up from his phone as he handed us the key to room 118. Emily and I shuffled down the dimly lit outdoor hallway, eager to get some rest. Our room was stuffy and smelled faintly of cigarette smoke, but we were too tired to care. We quickly got ready for bed, brushing our teeth and changing into pajamas. Within minutes of lying down, we were both fast asleep. I'm not sure what time it was when I woke up. The red numbers on the bedside clock were blurry as I blinked away sleep. It took me a moment to remember where I was. The unfamiliar motel room slowly coming into focus. I rolled over, expecting to see Emily's sleeping form next to me, but the other side of the bed was empty. "Em?" I called out groggily. No response. I sat up, looking around the dark room. The bathroom door was open, no light on inside. Emily's suitcase still sat where she'd left it by the dresser. Her phone was on the nightstand, plugged in to charge. A twinge of unease crept through me. Where could she have gone in the middle of the night? I got up and flicked on the lights, checking the tiny bathroom and closet. No sign of her anywhere. Maybe she'd gone to get ice or a snack from the vending machines. I pulled on a t-shirt and slipped my room key in my pocket before stepping outside. The night air was cool on my skin as I walked along the row of identical doors. The ice and vending area was deserted. My unease was growing into real worry now. I quickened my pace as I made my way to the office. The same clerk from earlier was still at the desk, looking half asleep. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "Have you seen my wife? The woman I checked in with earlier?" He blinked at me in confusion. "Sir, I'm sorry, but you checked in alone earlier. I didn't see anyone with you." I stared at him, dumbfounded. "What? No, that's impossible. My wife and I checked in together just a few hours ago, room 118. The clerk tapped at his computer for a moment. "I'm showing a single occupancy for that room, sir." "Are you sure your wife didn't stay somewhere else?" "Of course I'm sure," I snapped, fear and frustration boiling over. "Look, can you check your security cameras? She has to be on there." He sighed but nodded, clicking through to the camera feeds. I watched over his shoulder as he rewound the footage. There I was, walking up to the desk alone. No Emily beside me. "This can't be right," I muttered. "Play it again." We watched it 3 more times. Each time it showed me checking in alone. No sign of Emily anywhere. My mind was reeling. How was this possible? I knew Emily had been with me. We'd driven for hours together, talked about where to stop for the night. I remembered her voice, her laugh, the feel of her hand in mine. She couldn't have just vanished into thin air. "Sir, are you feeling all right?" the clerk asked, eyeing me warily. "Maybe you should go back to your room and rest. I'm sure there's a perfectly reasonable explanation." But I couldn't just go back to the room and wait. I needed answers. I needed to find Emily. "Call the police," I demanded. "My wife is missing. Something's not right here." The clerk hesitated, but must have seen the desperation in my eyes. He picked up the phone and made the call. The next few hours passed in a blur. Police arrived and questioned me extensively. They searched the motel grounds and surrounding area. They reviewed security footage again and again, but there was no trace of Emily anywhere. I called her family, her friends, anyone who might have heard from her. No one had any idea where she could be. Her phone was still in our room, her credit cards unused. It was as if she'd simply ceased to exist. As the sky began to lighten with the approaching dawn, I sat numbly in the motel office. The police were wrapping up their initial investigation, clearly frustrated by the lack of leads. "Mr. Johnson," one of the detectives approached me. "We're going to keep searching, but I have to be honest. This is one of the strangest cases I've ever seen. There's no evidence your wife was ever here. Are you absolutely certain she was with you when you arrived?" I nodded emphatically. "I know how it sounds, but I swear she was here. We drove together, checked in together. I'm not crazy." He gave me a sympathetic look. "I believe that you believe that, sir, but without any proof, there's not much more we can do right now." We'll keep investigating, of course, but you should prepare yourself. We may never know what really happened here." As he walked away, I felt utterly lost and alone. How could I go on without Emily? How could I face a world where the woman I loved had simply vanished without a trace? The events of that night haunt me to this day. I've replayed every moment in my head 1,000 times, searching for some clue I might have missed. But I'm no closer to answers now than I was then. Sometimes I wonder if I really am crazy, if somehow I imagined Emily's presence that night. But then I look at our photos together, read our old text messages, and I know she was real. She existed. She was my wife, and I loved her. I don't know if I'll ever understand what happened in that Nevada motel. Was it some kind of supernatural event? An elaborate hoax or conspiracy? Or something even stranger that I can't begin to comprehend? All I know is that I lost the most important person in my life that night, and I would give anything to have her back, to understand where she went and why. The not knowing is the hardest part. It's a wound that never fully heals. I still find myself searching for Emily's face in crowds, hoping against hope that I'll spot her somewhere, that this whole nightmare will turn out to have a logical explanation. But deep down, I know the truth. Whatever happened that night in Nevada defies all logic and reason, and I'm left to carry on alone, forever haunted by the mystery of my vanishing wife. The room was about what I expected. Dated decor, slightly musty smell, but clean enough. I flopped down on the bed, ready to get some much-needed sleep. But as I lay there, I realized the room was uncomfortably warm and stuffy. I fiddled with the ancient window unit air conditioner, but couldn't get it to turn on. Annoyed, I called down to the front desk to ask about it. "Sorry about that," the clerk drawled. "I'll send our maintenance guy up to take a look first thing in the morning." I grumbled my thanks and tried to get comfortable, eventually drifting off into a restless sleep. I was jolted awake a few hours later by a loud knocking at the door. Groggy and disoriented, I fumbled for my phone to check the time. 2:17 a.m. Who the hell would be knocking at this hour? "Maintenance!" called a male voice from the other side of the door. "Here to fix your AC." I blinked in confusion. Hadn't the clerk said they'd send someone in the morning? It's the middle of the night," I called back. "Can you come back in the morning?" "Won't take but a minute, sir," the voice insisted. "I can have your AC fixed up real quick so you can get a good night's sleep." Something about his tone made me uneasy. I peered through the peephole and saw a man in a blue uniform shirt, but the hallway was dimly lit and I couldn't make out his face clearly. "Look, I appreciate it, but I'd rather wait till morning," I said firmly. "Thanks anyway." I expected him to leave, but instead he knocked again, more insistently this time. "Sir, I really need to get in there and take a look. Won't be but a minute of your time." My unease was growing by the second. Why was he so persistent about getting into the room? I decided to call down to the front desk to confirm they had actually sent someone up. The same clerk from earlier answered, sounding even more bored than before. But her tone changed quickly when I explained the situation. "Sir, we absolutely did not send anyone to your room," she said, suddenly alert. "Our maintenance staff doesn't work overnight shifts. Please do not let that person in. I'm calling security right now." A chill ran down my spine as I hung up the phone. The repairman was still outside, alternating between knocking and jiggling the doorknob. "Sir, I really need you to open up," he called. a new edge of urgency in his voice. "There's an issue I gotta fix right away." My heart was pounding as I looked around frantically for anything I could use to defend myself. I grabbed the lamp off the bedside table, yanking the cord out of the wall. "I know you're not really maintenance," I shouted, trying to keep my voice steady. "The front desk says they didn't send anyone. You need to leave right now, or I'm calling the police." There was a moment of tense silence. Then I heard a string of muffled curses from the other side of the door. The doorknob rattled violently as he tried to force it open. "Open this fucking door," he snarled, all pretense of politeness gone. I backed away from the door, gripping the lamp tightly as my only weapon. My hands were shaking as I dialed 911 on my cell phone. Just as the operator answered, I heard heavy footsteps pounding down the hallway, followed by a man's voice shouting, "Hey, stop right there!" There was a brief scuffle in the hallway, then silence. After a minute, there was a gentle knock at my door. "Sir, this is motel security," called a different male voice. "The situation is under control now. Are you all right in there?" I was still trembling as I cracked open the door. A large man in a security uniform was standing there, looking concerned. Further down the hallway, I could see the repairman face down on the floor, his hands cuffed behind his back. Over the next couple hours, the motel turned into a whirlwind of activity as police arrived to question me and arrest the intruder. I learned that he had been targeting multiple motels in the area, using a stolen uniform to try to gain access to rooms. They believed he was looking for valuables to steal, but given how aggressively he had tried to get into my room, I shuddered to think what might have happened if I had let him in. As dawn broke, I sat in the motel lobby, still shaken as I gave my official statement to a detective. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving me utterly drained. "You did the right thing by trusting your instincts," the detective assured me. "A lot of people might have opened the door without thinking twice." I nodded numbly, the full weight of how close I'd come to potential danger sinking in. As I walked back to my room to gather my things, planning to check out and get as far away from this place as possible, I found myself hyper-aware of every person I passed in the hallway. The experience left me rattled for weeks afterward. I became much more cautious about staying in motels, always double-checking the identity of any staff who came to my room. Even in my own home, I found myself hesitating before opening the door to repair people or delivery drivers. It was a stark reminder of how vulnerable we can be, even in seemingly mundane situations. The world suddenly felt less safe, less predictable. I knew logically that what happened to me was rare, but I couldn't shake the lingering fear and paranoia. Over time, the intensity of those feelings faded, but I never quite returned to my previous sense of ease. To this day, years later, I still feel a flutter of anxiety whenever I hear an unexpected knock at the door. That night at the Sunset Motel taught me a lesson I'll never forget. Trust your instincts and never take your safety for granted. I've never been one to believe in ghosts or the supernatural, but after what happened to me last month at that old motel in Pennsylvania, I'm not so sure anymore. I still get chills thinking about it. I was on a road trip through the Appalachians, just me and my beat-up Subaru. It was late October, and the fall colors were stunning, rolling hills blanketed in reds and golds. I'd been driving for hours and was dead tired when I spotted a sign for the Willow Creek Inn. It looked a bit run down, but I figured it'd do for the night. The place was clearly ancient, all creaky floorboards and faded wallpaper. The old guy at the front desk barely looked up from his newspaper as he handed me a key. "Room 23?" Top of the stairs, he grunted. I lugged my duffel bag up to the second floor. The narrow hallway was dimly lit, the carpet threadbare. A musty smell hung in the air. Room 23 was at the very end, tucked under the eaves. Inside it was small but clean enough. I flopped onto the lumpy mattress, too exhausted to care about the dated decor. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, I jolted awake. For a second I was disoriented, unsure where I was. Then I remembered the motel, but something felt off. The room seemed darker, the shadows deeper, and there was a sound. At first I thought it was the wind, or maybe pipes creaking, but as I listened, I realized it was coming from above me, from the attic. It was a slow, dragging noise, scrape, thump, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. I lay there frozen, straining my ears. It had to be my imagination, right? Old buildings make weird noises all the time, but the sounds continued, maddeningly regular. Scrape, thump, scrape, thump. After what felt like hours, curiosity got the better of me. I had to know what was making that noise. I crept out into the hallway, wincing at every creak of the floorboards. At the end was a narrow door I hadn't noticed before. It was slightly ajar. Heart pounding, I approached. The attic. I hesitated, hand on the doorknob. Part of me screamed to go back to bed, to forget about it, but I couldn't. I had to know. I pushed the door open. It swung inward with a long, drawn-out groan. Beyond was pitch blackness. I fumbled for my phone, switching on the flashlight. The beam illuminated rickety wooden stairs leading up into gloom. Swallowing hard, I began to climb. Each step groaned under my weight. Cobwebs brushed my face. The air grew thick with dust, making me cough. At the top of the stairs, I paused. The sounds had stopped. An oppressive silence pressed in around me. I swept my light across the attic. It was cluttered with old furniture draped in sheets, cardboard boxes, and assorted junk. Dust motes swirled in the beam, and then I saw them. Footprints in the thick dust coating the floor. Fresh ones. Ice slid down my spine. Someone, or something, had been up here recently. Very recently. My breath came in short gasps as I followed the trail with my light. They led deeper into the attic, weaving between piles of debris. I don't know what possessed me to follow them. Morbid fascination, I guess. Or maybe I just couldn't believe what I was seeing was real. I picked my way carefully across the creaking floorboards, following those impossible footprints. They led to a far corner where the roof sloped down low. There, half hidden behind a stack of old trunks, was a figure. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought it was a person, but as I drew closer, I realized it was just a mannequin, an old dress form, its fabric yellowed with age. I let out a shaky laugh, feeling foolish. Of course there was a rational explanation. I'd let my imagination run wild over nothing. I turned to head back downstairs, and that's when I saw it. In the split second before I moved my light, I caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye. A shadow detaching itself from the darkness. I whirled around, heart in my throat. But there was nothing there, just more piles of junk and cobwebbed corners. "Hello," I called out, hating how my voice quavered. "Is someone there?" Silence. But now that silence felt watchful, as if the whole attic was holding its breath. I backed away slowly, keeping my light trained on the shadows. They seemed to shift and writhe, playing tricks on my eyes. Every creak of the floorboards made me flinch. I don't know how long I stood there, muscles coiled tight as springs, waiting for something. But nothing happened. No otherworldly apparition materialized. No ghostly voice whispered in my ear. Eventually, I managed to tear myself away. I stumbled back down the stairs on shaky legs, slamming the attic door behind me. I spent the rest of the night huddled under the covers, jumping at every little noise. When dawn finally broke, I checked out immediately. The old man at the desk just nodded as if he'd been expecting it. As I threw my bag in the car, I glanced up at the attic windows. For a second, I could have sworn I saw a face peering out. But when I looked again, there was nothing. I peeled out of there like the devil himself was chasing me. And you know what? Maybe he was. It's been weeks now, and I still can't shake the feeling that I narrowly escaped something that night. Sometimes I wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I can hear that scraping, thumping noise. And always, I have the sensation of being watched. I've done some research since then. Turns out the Willow Creek Inn has quite a history. Built in the 1800s, it's seen its share of tragedy. There are rumors of secret rooms, of people who checked in and were never seen again. Was it all just an overactive imagination fueled by an old, creepy building? Or did I brush up against something beyond my understanding that night? I don't know. But I do know one thing. You couldn't pay me to set foot in that place again. Some mysteries are better left unsolved, and some attics are better left unexplored. The motel looked like it had seen better days. Peeling paint, flickering neon sign, sagging roof. But I was exhausted and just needed a place to crash for the night before continuing on in the morning. I grabbed my duffel bag from the trunk and headed to the office to check in. A bell jingled as I pushed open the door. The interior was dimly lit and had a musty smell. An older woman with graying hair sat behind the counter, leafing through a magazine. She looked up as I approached and gave me an odd look, almost like she recognized me. "Well, look who's back," she said with a smile. "Didn't expect to see you again so soon." I furrowed my brow in confusion. "I'm sorry, but I think you must have me confused with someone else. This is my first time here." The woman tilted her head, still smiling. "Oh, come now, don't be silly. You were just here last week. How could I forget that wild story you told me about the UFO sighting?" My stomach did a little flip. What was she talking about? I'd never been to this town before, let alone stayed at this motel or talked to this woman. "Ma'am, I really think you're mistaking me for someone else," I said firmly. "I've never been here before. I'm just passing through on my way to Canada." She waved her hand dismissively. All right, have it your way. But you can't fool me. I never forget a face. Same room as last time?" At this point, I was thoroughly creeped out, but also dead tired. I decided to just go along with it, to avoid further confusion. Sure, same room is fine," I mumbled. She handed me a key attached to a faded plastic tag with the number 13. Great. "Sleep tight," she said with a wink. "And try not to have any more alien encounters, eh?" I hurried out of the office, my skin crawling. What the hell was going on? As I walked to my room, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong here. The whole interaction felt surreal, like I'd stepped into some kind of alternate reality. I found room 13 and let myself in, immediately locking the door behind me. The room was basic but clean enough. Just a bed, nightstand, and small TV. I tossed my bag on the floor and flopped onto the bed, my mind racing. Maybe the woman was just confused or had some kind of memory issue. Or maybe this was all an elaborate prank. Whatever the explanation, I decided to just try and get some sleep and get out of here first thing in the morning. I must have dozed off at some point because I jolted awake suddenly in the middle of the night. The room was pitch black and utterly silent. For a moment I couldn't remember where I was. Then it all came flooding back, the weird motel, the creepy receptionist. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I became aware of a faint sound. It was barely audible at first, but growing steadily louder. A low, pulsing hum that seemed to be coming from outside. I sat up in bed, straining my ears. The humming grew more intense, vibrating through the walls. It didn't sound like any kind of machinery or electrical equipment I'd ever heard before. There was something decidedly alien about it. My heart began to race. What the hell was making that noise? I stumbled out of bed and cautiously approached the window. Peering through a gap in the curtains, I scanned the parking lot. At first, I didn't see anything unusual. Then a flash of light caught my eye. Something was moving in the shadows between the buildings. I squinted, trying to make out the shape. It looked almost like, no, that wasn't possible. Just then, 3 sharp knocks on my door made me nearly jump out of my skin. I spun around, my pulse pounding in my ears. "Hello?" I called out shakily. "Who's there?" No response, just more knocking, more insistent this time. "What do you want?" I shouted, panic rising in my chest. The knocking stopped abruptly. An eerie silence fell over the room. I stood frozen, afraid to move or make a sound. After what felt like an eternity, I heard footsteps moving away from my door. I let out a shaky breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. What the hell was happening? I crept back to the window and peeked out again. The strange light and movement I'd seen earlier were gone. The parking lot was empty and still. There was no way I was going back to sleep after that. I paced the small room, jumping at every creak and noise. As soon as the first light of dawn appeared, I grabbed my bag and got the hell out of there. I practically ran to my car, not even bothering to check out properly. As I peeled out of the parking lot, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The old woman from the office was standing outside, watching me drive away with that same unsettling smile. I drove for hours, putting as much distance as I could between myself and that bizarre border town. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel as I replayed the events of the night in my mind. None of it made any sense. How did the receptionist seem to know me? What was that strange humming noise? Who or what had been knocking on my door? And what had I seen moving in the shadows? Part of me wanted to go to the police, but what would I even tell them? I had no proof that anything sinister had actually occurred. And the more I thought about it, the more I started to doubt my own perceptions and memories. Had it all just been an especially vivid nightmare? Some kind of stress-induced hallucination from too much driving? Or had I unwittingly stumbled into something truly inexplicable? To this day, I still don't have any answers. I've scoured the internet for information about that town and motel, but found nothing concrete. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing, but then I'll catch a glimpse of an old motel sign on the highway or hear a strange noise in the night, and it all comes rushing back. Whatever happened that night on the Canadian border, it shook me to my core. It made me question everything I thought I knew about reality and perception. I still get chills thinking about it. Sometimes I'm tempted to go back to see if I can make sense of it all. But a bigger part of me never wants to set foot in that town again. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. All I know is that I'll never forget that night, as much as I might want to. The memory of it lingers like a bad dream that I can never fully wake up from. The elderly man at the front desk barely looked up from his newspaper as he handed me the key to room 13. "Checkout's at 11, he mumbled. I nodded and made my way down the dimly lit exterior hallway. rolling my small suitcase behind me. The room was about what I expected: dated decor, musty smell, thin carpet. But it was clean enough and had a bed, which was all I really needed. I tossed my bag on the ratty armchair and flopped onto the bed with a sigh of relief. After a quick shower to wash off the road grime, I was ready to call it a night. As I was brushing my teeth, something about my reflection in the bathroom mirror caught my eye. At first, I couldn't quite put my finger on what seemed off. The mirror looked normal enough, a bit cloudy and spotted with age, but nothing unusual for a cheap motel. But as I leaned in closer, squinting at my reflection, I noticed a tiny discrepancy. The mole on my left cheek, a feature I've had my whole life, wasn't there. I blinked hard, thinking my tired eyes were playing tricks on me. But no, it was definitely missing from my reflection. A chill ran down my spine. How was this possible? I touched my face, feeling the familiar raised bump of the mole. But in the mirror, my fingers moved over smooth skin. My heart started to race as I noticed other small inconsistencies. My hair part was slightly off. The collar of my t-shirt was folded differently. With trembling hands, I waved at the mirror. My reflection waved back, but with an almost imperceptible delay, as if it was trying to mimic my movements in real time. Cold sweat broke out on my forehead as the horrible realization dawned on me. This wasn't a mirror at all. It was some kind of screen or window, and someone or something on the other side was watching me. I stumbled backwards out of the bathroom, my mind reeling. Was I going crazy? Maybe I was more tired than I realized, and my eyes were playing tricks. I paced the small room, trying to calm my racing thoughts. But every time I glanced at the mirror, the sense of wrongness intensified. I forced myself to act normal, not wanting whoever was watching to know I was onto them. But inside, I was in full panic mode. Who was behind this elaborate setup? The creepy old man at the front desk? Some kind of human trafficking ring? Government surveillance? Each possibility seemed more terrifying than the last. I knew I needed to get out of there immediately, but I was afraid of alerting my watchers. So I went through the motions of getting ready for bed, all the while formulating an escape plan. I turned off the lights and lay in bed for what felt like hours, every muscle tense, straining to hear any sound of someone approaching my room. Finally, when I was reasonably sure the coast was clear, I silently packed my bag. Moving as quietly as possible, I eased open the door and slipped out into the cool night air. My rental car was still sitting in the parking lot, thank God. I tossed my bag in and started the engine, driving away as calmly as I could manage. It wasn't until I was several miles down the highway that I let out the breath I'd been holding. My hands were shaking so badly I had to pull over. What the hell had just happened? Part of me wanted to go to the police, but what would I even say? I had no proof, just a gut feeling and some small discrepancies that would sound insane if I tried to explain them. I drove through the night, putting as much distance between myself and that motel as possible. But even now, weeks later, I can't shake the feeling of being watched. I check every mirror I encounter, looking for those telltale inconsistencies. I'm hesitant to stay in hotels or use public restrooms. The experience has made me hyper-aware of how vulnerable we all are in this modern age of constant surveillance. Our phones track our movements, our online activity is monitored, cameras are everywhere. But to have such an egregious violation of privacy in a place that's supposed to be a safe refuge for travelers, it's truly terrifying. I've done some research since that night, looking for similar experiences or any information about the Pine Grove Motel, but I've found nothing concrete. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing. But then I catch a glimpse of my reflection, my real reflection, and I know with bone-deep certainty that what I experienced was real. So I'm sharing my story as a warning. Be vigilant, even in places where you expect privacy. Trust your instincts if something feels off. And maybe think twice before staying at out-of-the-way motels in rural Virginia. You never know who might be watching from the other side of the mirror. I checked in around 10 p.m. The night clerk was friendly enough, an older guy with a thick southern drawl. He gave me the key to room 14, and I lugged my suitcase up the metal stairs to the second floor. The room was basic but clean. 2 double beds with faded floral bedspreads, a small desk, an old TV bolted to the wall. I took a quick shower, set my phone alarm for 7 a.m., and crashed hard. When I woke up the next morning, something felt off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it at first in my groggy state. The light coming through the curtains seemed different somehow. As I became more alert, a feeling of unease started to creep over me. I sat up and looked around the room, and that's when the panic set in. This wasn't my room. The layout was all wrong. There was only 1 queen bed instead of 2 doubles. The furniture was completely different, dark wood instead of the light laminate from the night before. Even the wallpaper was different, a pale blue instead of beige. For a moment I wondered if I was dreaming, but I pinched myself hard and felt the sharp pain. This was real. Somehow, in the middle of the night, I had been moved to an entirely different room. I jumped out of bed, heart racing. Where were my things? My suitcase was gone, along with my wallet, phone, and car keys that I'd left on the nightstand. I was only wearing the t-shirt and boxers I'd slept in. I ran to the window and yanked open the curtains. Instead of the parking lot, I was looking out at a small courtyard garden. What the hell was going on? Trying to stay calm, I went to the room phone to call the front desk. But when I picked it up, there was no dial tone. The line was dead. At this point, I was in full-blown panic mode. I threw open the door and bolted out into the hallway. That's when things got even weirder. Instead of the exterior corridor I remembered from last night, I was in an interior hallway with dark patterned carpet. I ran downstairs to the lobby, probably looking like a crazy person in just my underwear. A different clerk was at the front desk now, a middle-aged woman who seemed startled by my sudden appearance. "Where's my room? Where's room 14?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked at me with concern. "Sir, we don't have a room 14. Our rooms only go up to 12. "That's impossible," I said. "I checked into room 14 last night. All my stuff is there. Please, you have to let me back in." The clerk shook her head. "I'm sorry, sir, but there must be some mistake. We don't have a room 14, and we haven't had any check-ins for the past 2 days. The motel's been pretty empty." I felt like I was losing my mind. How could this be happening? "Look, I know this sounds crazy, but I swear I checked in last night. An older man was working. He gave me the key to room 14. I had a suitcase, my wallet, everything. Now, I've woken up in a completely different room, and all my stuff is gone. Please, you have to help me." The woman was looking increasingly alarmed. "Sir, I think we need to call the police. It sounds like you may have been the victim of some kind of crime." "Yes, please call them," I said. At least then I'd have someone who could investigate what the hell was going on. While we waited for the police to arrive, the clerk let me wait in the office and gave me a bottle of water. I was shaking, my mind racing through possible explanations, each one seeming more far-fetched than the last. When 2 officers finally showed up about 20 minutes later, I recounted my story again. They took me seriously and did a thorough search of the motel, but found nothing. No room 14, no trace of my belongings, nothing to indicate I'd ever been there before that morning. They checked the security footage from the parking lot and lobby. There I was on camera, checking in around 10 p.m. just like I'd said, but the footage showed me being given a key to room 7, not 14, and the timestamp showed it happened 3 days ago, not last night. I felt like I was going insane. How could that be possible? I clearly remembered checking in last night, not 3 days ago, and I was absolutely certain it had been room 14. The officers were baffled. They said they'd open an investigation, but I could tell they were skeptical of my story. Hell, I was starting to doubt my own sanity at this point. With no wallet or phone, I had no way to prove my identity or contact anyone. The police let me use their phone to call my sister in Florida. Thank God I had her number memorized. She was confused and worried, but agreed to drive up and get me. I spent the next several hours sitting in the motel lobby in clothes borrowed from Lost and Found, feeling completely lost and disoriented. I kept replaying the events in my mind, trying to make sense of what had happened. Had I somehow sleepwalked to a different room? But that didn't explain my missing belongings or the discrepancies with check-in dates. When my sister finally arrived that evening, I broke down crying as I hugged her. I was so relieved to see a familiar face, to have someone who knew me and could confirm I wasn't crazy. We drove back to Florida that night. I was too shaken to stay anywhere near that motel. In the days and weeks that followed, I obsessed over trying to solve the mystery of what had happened to me. I called the motel multiple times, but they stuck to their story. The police investigation turned up nothing. I've spent countless hours researching similar cases online, looking for any possible explanation. Parallel universes, glitches in the matrix, some elaborate prank or crime I still can't fathom. I still don't have any answers. All I know is that somehow, in the span of one night, I lost several days of my life, all my possessions, and my sense of what's real. I'm left with this gnawing uncertainty, never fully trusting my own memories or perception of reality. It's been months now, and I still have nightmares about waking up in that strange room. I avoid motels at all costs. Part of me is still hoping for some rational explanation to emerge, but deep down, I'm haunted by the possibility that there are things in this world beyond our understanding. Things that can pluck us out of our reality and drop us somewhere else entirely, leaving us to question everything we thought we knew. I don't expect anyone to believe my story. Hell, I'm not sure I'd believe it if it hadn't happened to me. But I swear every word is true. I just wish I knew why it happened, or if it will ever happen again. All I can do now is share my experience and hope that maybe somehow it will help me find answers, or at least help me feel a little less alone in grappling with this impossible thing that turned my world upside down. Relieved, I pulled into the gravel parking lot. The place looked pretty run down, peeling paint, flickering lights, overgrown weeds everywhere. But at that point I was so tired I didn't care. I just needed a place to crash for the night. The office was empty when I walked in. An old-fashioned bell on the counter dinged as I tapped it. After a minute, a disheveled older man emerged from the back room, rubbing his eyes like I'd just woken him up. "Need a room?" he mumbled, not making eye contact. "Yeah, just for tonight," I replied. He wordlessly slid me a key attached to a plastic tag with the number 13. "Great. That'll be $40 cash," he said. I handed over 2 20s. "Checkout's at 11, he added. before shuffling back into the shadows. The whole interaction left me feeling uneasy, but I was too exhausted to care. I just wanted to lie down. I drove around to the row of rooms and found the marker 13 at the very end. The key stuck in the rusty lock, but I finally got the door open with a loud creak. The room was about what you'd expect from a $40 motel. Dingy carpet, peeling wallpaper, a faint musty smell, but the bed looked clean enough, so I tossed my bag down and flopped onto the lumpy mattress with a sigh of relief. I was just about to drift off when I heard it, muffled voices coming through the wall from the room next door. I couldn't make out any words, just the low murmur of what sounded like an argument. At first I tried to ignore it, but something about the tone of the voices put me on edge. They sounded angry, agitated. The volume would rise and fall erratically. After about 10 minutes, I heard a loud thump against the adjoining wall that made me sit bolt upright. My heart was pounding as I strained my ears, trying to figure out what was going on. The voices had stopped, but now I heard shuffling noises, like furniture being moved. Then silence. I got up and pressed my ear to the wall, but couldn't hear anything else. As I turned back toward the bed, movement outside my window caught my eye. A shadow passed by, briefly blocking out the dim glow of the parking lot lights. I froze, hardly daring to breathe. There it was again, a human-shaped silhouette moving past my window, and another. How many people were out there? My hand shaking, I reached for my phone to call for help. No signal, of course. I crept over to the window and peeked through a gap in the dusty curtains. The parking lot was empty except for my car, but I could have sworn I'd seen. A sharp knock on my door made me jump about a foot in the air. I spun around, my heart racing. "Hello?" A muffled voice called from outside. "Management need to talk to you." It didn't sound like the old guy from the office. The voice was younger, with a slight accent I couldn't place. "Just a minute," I called back, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. I looked around frantically for a weapon, anything I could use to defend myself. I grabbed the rickety lamp off the bedside table, yanking the cord from the wall. Another knock, more insistent this time. "Sir, open up, please. It's important." "What's this about?" I asked, inching closer to the door. "There's been a complaint about noise from your room. Need to discuss it with you." Noise complaint? That made no sense. I'd barely made a sound since I got here. And I was the one who'd heard noises from next door, not the other way around. "I think you must have the wrong room," I said. "I haven't made any noise." A pause, then, "Sir, I'm going to need you to open this door right now." The menace in his tone sent chills down my spine. This was bad, really bad. I looked around wildly, trying to form a plan. The bathroom window, maybe I could squeeze through it and make a run for my car. As I edged toward the bathroom, I heard multiple sets of footsteps outside, voices murmuring. They were gathering reinforcements. My breath coming in panicked gasps, I locked myself in the tiny bathroom and climbed up onto the sink. The window was small and grimy, but I thought I could just barely fit through. As I struggled to pry it open, I heard a loud crash from the main room. They'd broken down the door, footsteps rushing in. "Where is he? Check the bathroom." With a final desperate heave, I managed to wrench the window open. I heard the bathroom doorknob jiggling as I hoisted myself up and began squeezing through the narrow opening. Halfway out, I felt hands grabbing at my legs, trying to pull me back in. I kicked wildly and finally tumbled out onto the ground outside. I scrambled to my feet and ran for my life, not daring to look back. I could hear shouts and pounding footsteps behind me as I sprinted across the parking lot to my car. My hands shaking violently, I fumbled with my keys and finally managed to unlock the door and dive inside. I jammed the key into the ignition and peeled out of there, tires squealing. In my rear-view mirror, I saw several shadowy figures emerge from my room, staring after me. One of them stepped into the road, but I was already long gone, flooring it down the dark highway. I drove for hours, my heart racing, expecting at any moment to see headlights gaining on me. But the road remained empty. As the adrenaline faded, I found myself wondering if I'd imagined the whole thing. It all seemed so surreal. What the hell had just happened back there? Who were those people, and what did they want with me? Part of me wanted to go to the police, but I had no proof of anything. And honestly, I just wanted to put as much distance between myself and that place as possible. To this day, I still don't know what was really going on at that motel, but I know that if I hadn't escaped when I did, something truly horrifying would have happened to me. I've never felt so vulnerable and isolated as I did that night. The memory still haunts me, that feeling of being hunted, of having nowhere to run. I don't think I'll ever be able to stay in a motel again without reliving that terror. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing. But then I remember the sound of that door crashing in, the hands grabbing at me as I climbed out the window. The pure panic and desperation I felt. It was all too real. I still travel for work sometimes, but I always make sure to book reputable hotels in populated areas now, and I never ever drive through the desert at night if I can help it. You never know what's really out there in the darkness, waiting. That night changed me, made me realize how quickly things can go from normal to nightmarish, how vulnerable we all are, especially when we're alone in unfamiliar places. I'm grateful I escaped, but the experience left deep scars. I still have nightmares about shadowy figures surrounding me, trapping me with nowhere to run. I wake up in a cold sweat, my heart racing. In those moments, I'm right back in that dingy motel room, knowing something terrible is about to happen. I've tried to rationalize it, to come up with logical explanations. Maybe it was just some kind of misunderstanding or prank gone wrong, but deep down, I know it was something far more sinister. The malevolence I sensed from those people was unmistakable. Sometimes I wonder if I should have gone back, tried to investigate further or report it to authorities. But the thought of returning to that place fills me with dread. And what could I even say? I have no evidence, just my own frightening memories. So I try to move on with my life and not dwell on it. But I'll never forget that night. The isolation, the fear, the desperate flight to safety. It's a stark reminder of how quickly our sense of security can be shattered. I'm sharing this as a warning to others. Be careful out there, especially when traveling alone in remote areas. Trust your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. Don't ignore those gut feelings like I initially did. And if you're ever driving through the Arizona desert late at night and see a sign for the Desert Oasis Motel, keep driving. No matter how tired you are, it's not worth the risk. Some places are better left unexplored. I count myself lucky to have escaped that night. Others may not have been so fortunate. I can only hope that by sharing my story, I might prevent someone else from stumbling into a similar nightmare. Stay safe out there, and always be aware of your surroundings. You never know what dangers might be lurking just out of sight. Normally, I wouldn't answer a blocked call, especially not in the middle of the night. But in my half-asleep state, I instinctively swiped to answer before I could really think about it. "Hello," I mumbled, my voice still thick with sleep. There was silence on the other end for a few long seconds. Just as I was about to hang up, thinking it was a prank call, a man's voice came through. "Hello, Emily," he said in a low, calm tone. "I can see you there on the couch. That's a nice blue sweater you're wearing." I froze. How did this person know my name and what I was wearing? I glanced down. Sure enough, I had on my favorite oversized blue sweater. A chill ran down my spine. "Who is this?" I demanded, suddenly wide awake. "How do you know what I'm wearing?" The man chuckled softly. "I told you, Emily, I can see you. I've been watching you for quite some time now." My heart started racing. I leapt up from the couch and started frantically checking the windows, making sure they were all locked and the curtains drawn. "Where are you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite my rising panic. "What do you want?" Now, the man said soothingly, as if speaking to a child. "There's no need to be afraid. I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to play a little game." "I'm calling the police," I said, reaching for the landline phone. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," the man said, his tone suddenly sharp. "Remember, I can see everything you do. If you try to call anyone, there will be consequences." I hesitated, my hand hovering over the phone. Was this guy bluffing? Or could he really see inside my house somehow? "That's better," the man said, his voice calm again. "Now I want you to go into your bedroom." "Why?" I asked warily. "Just do as I say," he replied. "Go to your bedroom now." Against my better judgment, I found myself moving towards my bedroom. My legs felt like lead, each step an effort. When I reached the doorway, I paused. "I'm here," I said. "Now what?" "Good girl," the man said. "Now look in your closet. Tell me what you see." With trembling hands, I opened my closet door. At first glance, everything looked normal, just my usual clothes and shoes. But then I noticed something out of place. Hanging at the very back was a man's black leather jacket, one I had definitely never seen before. There's a jacket," I stammered. "A black leather jacket. It's not mine." The man on the phone let out a pleased hum. "Very observant. Now I want you to put it on." "What? No!" I exclaimed. "I'm not touching that. Where did it come from?" "Put on the jacket, Emily," the man repeated, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. "Unless you want me to come put it on you myself." My blood ran cold at the implied threat. With shaking hands, I reached out and took the jacket off its hanger. It was heavy, the leather cool against my skin as I slipped it on over my sweater. It was much too big for me, clearly meant for a man. "It's on," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Excellent," the man purred. "Now reach into the right pocket. Tell me what you find." Dreading what I might discover, I slowly slid my hand into the pocket. My fingers brushed against something small and metallic. I pulled it out. It was a key, an ordinary-looking house key. "It's a key," I told him. "Very good," he said. "That key opens your front door." My stomach dropped. "That's impossible," I said. "I just changed the locks last week. No one else has a key." The man laughed. "Are you sure about that? Why don't you go check your front door? Make sure it's still locked." Heart pounding, I made my way to the front door. I tried the handle. It was still locked, thank God. But when I put the key from the jacket into the lock, it turned smoothly. The door swung open. I slammed it shut and relocked it, then sank to the floor, my back against the door. How did you get a key to my house?" I asked, my voice shaking. "I have my ways," the man said cryptically. "I know a lot about you, Emily. I know where you work. I know your daily routines. I know that you always order the same latte from the coffee shop on 5th Street every morning. I know that you visit your mother every Sunday. I know that you sleep with your bedroom window cracked open, even in winter." Tears were streaming down my face now. This stranger knew intimate details of my life. He had been watching me, following me, and now he was inside my head, making me do things against my will. "Please," I begged. "What do you want from me?" "Want?" the man mused. "I don't want anything from you, Emily. This is simply entertainment for me, a way to pass the time." "So what happens now?" I asked. "Now?" he chuckled. "Now, you go about your life as normal. You go to work, you visit your mother, you get your morning latte, but you'll always be looking over your shoulder, wondering if I'm there, wondering if today is the day I decide to do more than just watch. Sweet dreams, Emily. I'll be in touch." The line went dead. I sat there on the floor for what felt like hours, too terrified to move. Eventually, I managed to get up and double-check all the locks. I even pushed furniture in front of the doors and windows, but I knew it was futile. This man, whoever he was, had already proven he could get into my home if he wanted to. He had access to my life in ways I couldn't even fathom. That was 3 weeks ago. I haven't heard from him since that night. I've changed my locks again, installed security cameras, even stayed with friends for a while. But I can't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time my phone rings, my heart stops. Every shadow on the street could be him. I don't know if he'll call again. I don't know what sick game he's playing. All I know is that my sense of safety, of having any control over my life, is shattered, and I'm left wondering, is he out there right now, watching me type this? Is he reading these words along with you? I don't think I'll ever feel truly safe again. When I saw the sign for a rest area coming up, I breathed a sigh of relief. I desperately needed to use the bathroom and stretch my legs. As I pulled into the dimly lit parking lot, I noticed there were only a couple other cars there, not surprising given the late hour and nasty weather. I quickly made my way through the downpour to the restroom building, my shoes squelching on the wet pavement. The fluorescent lights inside were harsh after the darkness outside. I did my business as fast as possible, wanting to get back on the road. As I was washing my hands, I glanced in the grimy mirror and noticed how haggard I looked. The long day and lack of sleep were clearly taking their toll. I splashed some cold water on my face, trying to wake myself up a bit. When I stepped back outside, the rain had let up slightly, but a thick fog was rolling in. I shivered and pulled my jacket tighter around me as I headed back towards my car. That's when I noticed something that made me stop in my tracks. There was a large white van parked a few spaces down from my sedan that definitely hadn't been there when I arrived. I hadn't heard any vehicles pull in while I was in the restroom. Where did it come from? As I stood there puzzling over it, the fog seemed to thicken even more, reducing visibility to just a few feet in front of me. An uneasy feeling settled in the pit of my stomach. Something about this whole situation felt off. I quickened my pace, wanting to get to my car as fast as possible. But as I approached, I realized with growing horror that there was a figure standing next to my driver's side door. My heart started pounding as I slowed my steps, trying to assess the situation. The person was tall and thin, dressed all in black. In the fog and darkness, I couldn't make out any features. They were just standing there motionless, facing my car. "Hello?" I called out cautiously. "Can I help you with something?" No response. The figure didn't move or acknowledge me in any way. My mind raced through possibilities. Maybe it was someone who had locked themselves out of their car and was hoping for help. But why weren't they responding to me? I took a few more hesitant steps forward. "Excuse me? Is everything all right?" Still nothing. As I got closer, I realized the person's posture was unnaturally rigid and straight. They weren't shifting their weight or making any of the small movements you'd expect from a living person. That's when a chill ran down my spine as another possibility occurred to me. What if this wasn't a person at all? What if it was some kind of mannequin or statue? But who would put something like that in a rest stop parking lot in the middle of the night? I was about 10 feet away now, close enough to reach out and touch the figure if I wanted to, but every instinct in my body was screaming at me not to get any nearer. Suddenly, without any warning, the figure's head snapped towards me with inhuman speed. I caught a glimpse of glowing red eyes in a face that was nothing but shadows. I stumbled backwards with a strangled yell, nearly falling on the wet pavement. My fight or flight response kicked in, and I turned to run, not caring which direction I went as long as it was away from that thing. In my panic, I slammed right into something solid. For a horrifying moment, I thought the creature had somehow gotten in front of me. But when I looked up, I realized I had run into the white van. Except it wasn't the same van. This one was older, rusted, with cracked windows and peeling paint. It looked like it had been abandoned there for years. I whirled around, trying to get my bearings. Where was my car? Where was the restroom building? All I could see was fog in every direction. A low, inhuman moan drifted through the mist behind me. I broke into a run again, my wet shoes slipping on the pavement. I had no idea where I was going. I just knew I had to get away. After what felt like an eternity of running blindly through the fog, I caught a glimpse of something familiar. My car. I almost cried with relief as I sprinted towards it. I fumbled for my keys with shaking hands, terrified that at any moment I would feel cold fingers on the back of my neck. Finally, I managed to unlock the door and dove inside, slamming it shut behind me. I jammed the key into the ignition and the engine roared to life. Without even bothering to put on my seatbelt, I threw the car into reverse and peeled out of the parking spot. As I was turning to head for the exit, my headlights swept across the lot. For a split second, they illuminated a group of dark figures standing motionless in the fog. There were at least a dozen of them, all identical to the one I had encountered by my car. I let out a wordless cry of terror and floored the gas pedal. My tires squealed as I fishtailed out of the parking lot and onto the main road. I drove for hours after that, too scared to stop anywhere. Every time I saw headlights in my rearview mirror, I was convinced it was that white van following me. I kept expecting to look over and see one of those figures sitting in my passenger seat. Eventually, the sky began to lighten as dawn approached. As the familiar landmarks of my hometown came into view, I finally started to relax slightly. But I knew I would never be able to forget what I had experienced in that rest stop. It's been weeks now, and I still have nightmares about those glowing red eyes emerging from the fog. I've tried researching that rest stop, looking for any stories of strange encounters there, but I can never seem to find it on any maps, no matter how hard I look. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing, if it was just an exhaustion-induced hallucination. But then I'll catch a glimpse of something dark out of the corner of my eye, or hear an echoing moan on the wind, and I know it was real. I don't know what those things in the parking lot were, or what they wanted. All I know is that I'll never stop at a rest area in the middle of the night again, and whenever I see a white van on the road, I take the next exit and find a different route. Some things are better left in the fog, unexamined and unexplained. As the rain intensified, I realized I had made a terrible mistake. The roads were becoming increasingly narrow and unfamiliar. My headlights barely pierced the darkness ahead, and I could feel my tires sliding on the muddy road with each turn. Panic started to set in as I realized I was hopelessly lost. My GPS had lost signal long ago, and there wasn't a single road sign or landmark to guide me. The dense forest pressed in on both sides of the road, creating an unsettling tunnel effect. I decided to try and turn around, figuring I could retrace my steps back to the main road. As I carefully maneuvered my car to make a U-turn on the narrow road, my headlights suddenly illuminated another vehicle that had silently pulled up behind me. My heart nearly stopped. Where had this car come from? I hadn't seen any headlights in my rearview mirror. The other vehicle was now blocking my path, making it impossible for me to turn around. I sat there frozen for a moment, unsure what to do. The other car's headlights were blinding in my mirrors. I couldn't make out any details about the vehicle or its occupants. An overwhelming sense of dread washed over me. After a tense standoff that felt like hours but was likely only seconds, I made a split-second decision. I put my car in drive and sped forward down the unfamiliar road, tires sliding in the mud. To my horror, I saw the other car's headlights appear in my rearview mirror. They were following me. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel as I pushed my car to go faster. The road was treacherous in the rain, and I knew one wrong move could send me careening into the trees. But the alternative, letting that mysterious vehicle catch up to me, seemed far worse. I don't know how long I drove like that, my pursuer always right behind me. The dense forest flew by in a dark blur. My mind raced with terrifying possibilities. Who was in that car? What did they want? Suddenly, the road curved sharply. I barely managed to keep control as I took the turn, my tires sliding dangerously close to the edge. For a brief moment, I lost sight of the headlights behind me. I held my breath, hoping against hope that I had finally lost them. But then I saw a flash of light through the trees off to my left. Somehow, they had found another road that cut through the forest and were now parallel to me. My blood ran cold as I realized they were trying to cut me off. I floored the accelerator, pushing my car to its limits. The engine roared in protest as I flew down the muddy road. Rain lashed against my windshield, and I could barely see where I was going. But I knew I couldn't stop. Just as I thought I might have gained some distance, I felt a sharp impact on the rear of my car. They had caught up and were now ramming me from behind. I screamed in terror, struggling to keep control of my vehicle. Another sharp turn in the road loomed ahead. I took it as fast as I dared, feeling my car start to fishtail. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought I was going to spin out, but somehow I managed to straighten out. To my shock and relief, I didn't see any headlights behind me. Had they crashed on that turn? I didn't dare slow down to find out. I kept driving as fast as I could, constantly checking my mirrors for any sign of pursuit. After what felt like an eternity, the dense forest finally started to thin out. I saw lights in the distance, a town. My relief was short-lived, however. As I approached the outskirts of the small town, my car suddenly sputtered and died. I coasted to a stop on the side of the road, my hands trembling as I tried to restart the engine. It was no use. I must have blown something while pushing it so hard during the chase. I was a sitting duck. Panicked, I grabbed my phone, praying I finally had signal. To my immense relief, I did. With shaking fingers, I dialed 911 and tried to explain my situation to the dispatcher. I'm not sure how coherent I was, babbling about being chased through the woods by an unknown vehicle. The dispatcher assured me they were sending officers to my location. I hung up and scanned the road behind me, dreading the sight of approaching headlights. But the road remained empty. As I waited for help to arrive, the adrenaline started to wear off. I became acutely aware of how vulnerable I was, alone in a broken-down car in the middle of nowhere. Every rustle of leaves in the wind made me jump. Suddenly, there was a loud thump on the roof of my car. I screamed, ducking down in my seat. The thumping continued, moving across the roof to the hood. It sounded like footsteps. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to look up. The thumping stopped, and for a long moment there was only silence broken by the sound of my ragged breathing. Then came a sharp rap on my driver's side window. I nearly jumped out of my skin. Slowly, hesitantly, I raised my head to look. There was nothing there, just darkness and the rain-streaked glass. I let out a shaky breath, wondering if I had imagined it all. But then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There were muddy footprints on the hood of my car. Before I could process this, I saw headlights approaching in the distance. For a terrifying moment, I thought my pursuer had returned. But as the vehicle got closer, I recognized the familiar shape of a police cruiser. I've never been so relieved to see law enforcement in my life. I practically fell out of my car as I scrambled to meet the officers, babbling my story between sobs. They listened patiently, though I could tell they were skeptical. They searched the area but found no sign of another vehicle. When I showed them the muddy footprints on my car, they exchanged glances I couldn't quite read. One of the officers gently suggested that in my panicked state, I might have imagined the pursuit, that the footprints could have been there before, and I just hadn't noticed them. I wanted to argue, to make them understand the terror I had experienced. But I was exhausted, both physically and emotionally, and a small part of me desperately wanted to believe their rational explanation. They gave me a ride into town, where I was able to get a room for the night and arrange for my car to be towed in the morning. I didn't sleep at all that night, jumping at every sound and constantly checking to make sure my door was locked. The next day, in the harsh light of morning, I almost managed to convince myself it had all been a product of my imagination, the result of getting lost in an unfamiliar area during a stormy night. But as I was checking out of the motel, I overheard a conversation that chilled me to the bone. Two locals were discussing a rash of similar incidents in the area, drivers being chased and terrorized on the back roads at night by an unknown vehicle. I left town as quickly as I could once my car was repaired. To this day, I avoid driving on unfamiliar roads at night, and whenever I see headlights in my rearview mirror, I can't help but tense up, wondering if this time the nightmare will repeat itself. I still don't know who was in that car or what they wanted. Sometimes I manage to convince myself it was all in my head, but in my darkest moments, when I'm alone at night, I find myself wondering, what if they're still out there? What if next time I'm not so lucky? As the doors closed and we pulled away from the station, I glanced around the car. It was completely empty, except for one other passenger seated at the far end. I didn't pay much attention at first, just relieved to have some quiet time to decompress. But after a few minutes, I started to get an uneasy feeling. Something about the other passenger seemed off. They were sitting perfectly still, facing forward, not moving a muscle. I couldn't even tell if they were breathing. I tried to shake off the creepy vibe, telling myself I was just overtired and imagining things, but I couldn't stop myself from stealing glances in their direction. The figure remained motionless, like a statue. As we rattled through the dark tunnels, my unease grew. I realized I couldn't make out any clear features of the passenger's face. It was oddly blurred and indistinct, like looking through frosted glass. A chill ran down my spine. I pulled out my phone, trying to distract myself by scrolling social media, but my eyes kept being drawn back to the strange figure. With growing horror, I noticed that their clothes appeared to be soaking wet, water dripping steadily onto the floor. But there was no puddle forming. The droplets seemed to vanish as soon as they hit the ground. My heart was pounding now. I wanted desperately to look away, but found myself unable to tear my gaze from the unsettling sight. The figure's head slowly began to turn towards me with unnatural, jerky movements. I caught a glimpse of milk-white eyes that didn't blink, boring into me with a cold, alien stare. Panic overwhelmed me. I leapt to my feet, ready to bolt to the other end of the car, but in that split second, the figure vanished. One moment it was there, the next, gone without a trace. I stood frozen, eyes darting wildly around the empty car. Had I imagined the whole thing? Was I having some kind of stress-induced hallucination? I sank back into my seat, trying to calm my racing pulse. But the feeling of being watched lingered. Out of the corner of my eye, I kept catching fleeting glimpses of a pale face or dark shape, gone as soon as I turned to look. When we finally pulled into my stop, I practically sprinted off the train. I didn't start to feel safe until I was out on the street under the comforting glow of streetlights. As I hurried home, I tried to convince myself it had all been in my head, just an exhausted mind playing tricks. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen was real. The memory of those lifeless eyes still makes my skin crawl. I've avoided taking the subway late at night ever since. The rational part of my brain says there must be a logical explanation. But another part of me will always wonder about that night, and about what exactly I encountered in that subway car. Some things are beyond explanation, beyond the bounds of what we consider possible. I never believed in the supernatural before, but after that night, I'm not so sure anymore. All I know is that I'll never forget the terror I felt in those moments, the absolute certainty that I was in the presence of something inhuman and malevolent. I still take the subway sometimes during the day, but I'm always on edge, hyper-aware of my surroundings. My eyes scan each car warily as I enter, half expecting to see that pale, otherworldly face staring back at me. So far, it hasn't reappeared, but the dread lingers. What if it comes back? What if next time it doesn't just watch, but reaches out to grab me with cold, wet hands? I've tried to tell myself it was just a bizarre, one-time occurrence, but deep down, a part of me is always braced for another encounter. The subway will never feel truly safe to me again. That one nightmarish ride changed everything. Now I know that lurking in the shadows of our mundane world, there are things that defy explanation, things that should not exist, but somehow do. Sometimes I wake up in a cold sweat, the phantom sensation of icy water dripping on my skin. In my nightmares, I'm trapped back on that subway car as it hurtles through endless dark tunnels. No matter how far I run, that impassive face is always right behind me, getting closer and closer. I've tried talking to friends about what happened, but they just laugh it off or tell me I must have dozed off and had a vivid dream. Maybe they're right. Maybe that would be easier to accept. But I know in my bones that what I experienced was real. The worst part is the not knowing. What was that thing? Where did it come from and where did it go? Was it some kind of ghost or interdimensional being? Or something even stranger that we don't have words for? The questions haunt me. but I know I'll probably never get answers. All I can do is try to move on with my life and not let the fear consume me. But I'll always be looking over my shoulder now, especially in dark, enclosed spaces. The world feels less safe, less certain. That one subway ride pulled back the curtain on a reality I wasn't prepared to face. I still get chills thinking about how it appeared so suddenly, as if materializing out of thin air. One moment the car was empty, the next, there it was. I keep replaying that moment in my mind, trying to make sense of it. But it defies all logic. The stillness was the most unnerving part. No breath, no blinking, no subtle movements, just that unnaturally rigid posture, like a mannequin come to life. But then those jerky, mechanical head movements. I've never seen anything move like that before or since. I remember every excruciating detail of its appearance, seared into my memory. The sickly pale skin with a faint greenish tinge, limp dark hair plastered to its skull, and those eyes completely white, no pupils or irises, just blank orbs that somehow still manage to convey a chilling intensity. The wet clothes are another detail that doesn't make sense. It wasn't raining that night. Where did all that water come from? And why didn't it leave any trace on the seat or floor? It's like the laws of physics didn't apply to this entity. Sometimes I wonder if I was its target specifically, or if I just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Did it seek me out for some reason? Or was I just unlucky enough to witness something not meant for human eyes? I've done some research since then, looking for similar encounters. I've found a few eerily similar stories from around the world, other late-night commuters describing unnaturally still figures that appear and disappear. It's somewhat comforting to know I'm not alone in this experience, but it also makes me wonder just how common these entities are, silently watching us from the shadows. I've started carrying a small bottle of holy water with me, just in case. I'm not even religious, but I figure it can't hurt. I've also taken to wearing a protective amulet my grandmother gave me years ago. Anything to feel a little safer, a little more in control. But the truth is, I know now that we're never truly safe. There are things out there beyond our understanding, beyond our ability to protect ourselves. All we can do is stay vigilant and hope we never cross paths with them again. I still have so many questions. Was it trying to communicate something? Was it hostile? Or simply curious? Where did it go when it vanished? Is it still out there somewhere, riding the subway and terrifying other unsuspecting passengers? I may never know the answers, but I'll carry the memory of that night with me forever. It changed me in ways I'm still trying to understand. The world feels bigger now, but also more dangerous, full of possibilities, but also lurking horrors. All I can do is try to live my life and not let the fear paralyze me. But I'll never take an empty subway car for granted again, and I'll always be watching the shadows, half expecting to see that pale face emerging from the darkness once more. The rain had started around 7 and was coming down in sheets now. I could hear it pounding against the windows as I typed away at my computer. Every so often a flash of lightning would illuminate the darkened office, casting eerie shadows across the rows of empty desks. I was in the zone, completely absorbed in my work, when movement outside the glass doors caught my eye. I looked up, expecting to see the night security guard making his rounds. But what I saw instead made my blood run cold. There was a figure standing just outside the doors, perfectly still, staring directly at me. They were wearing a dark hooded coat, their face completely obscured in shadow. I blinked hard, thinking my tired eyes were playing tricks on me. But when I looked again, the figure was still there. A chill ran down my spine. Who was this person, and why were they just watching me? I tried to convince myself it was probably just a homeless person seeking shelter from the rain. But something about their unnaturally still posture and the way they seemed to be looking right through me filled me with a deep sense of unease. I quickly looked away and tried to focus back on my work, but I could feel their eyes boring into me. After a few minutes, I couldn't take it anymore and glanced back up. The figure hadn't moved an inch. They were in the exact same position, still staring intently in my direction. My heart started to race. This wasn't normal behavior. No one just stands motionless like that for that long. I debated calling security, but worried I'd sound paranoid reporting someone for simply standing outside. Plus, I didn't want to draw attention to myself or provoke whoever this was. So I kept working, stealing quick glances every few minutes. Each time, the hooded figure remained frozen in place. The longer this went on, the more unsettled I became. It felt like they were studying me, sizing me up. But for what purpose? An hour passed this way, with the stranger's unwavering gaze trained on me the entire time. I was on edge, jumping at every little sound. The tap of rain against the windows started to sound like footsteps. Shadows in the corners of the office seemed to shift and move. I knew I was being irrational, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being hunted. My skin crawled with the sensation of being watched. I felt exposed and vulnerable, sitting there alone in the brightly lit office while this ominous figure lurked in the darkness outside. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I quickly gathered my things, my hands shaking as I shoved papers into my bag. I kept my head down, avoiding looking at the doors. But as I stood to leave, morbid curiosity got the better of me, and I glanced up one last time. The figure was gone. I let out a shaky breath, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. Had I imagined the whole thing? Maybe lack of sleep was making me paranoid. I hurried to the elevator, eager to get home and put this weird night behind me. As I waited for the elevator, I couldn't resist peeking back down the hallway toward the office doors. My heart nearly stopped. The hooded figure was inside now, standing at the end of the hall, still fixated on me. How had they gotten in? The doors should have been locked. Panic seized me. I jabbed frantically at the elevator button, willing it to arrive faster. After what felt like an eternity, the doors finally slid open and I dove inside, repeatedly smashing the close door button. Just before the doors shut, I caught a glimpse of the figure starting to move in my direction with slow, purposeful steps. My legs felt weak as I rode down to the lobby. I tried to steady my breathing and talk myself down. Maybe this was all just a huge misunderstanding, but deep down I knew something was very wrong. The predatory way they moved, the oppressive feeling of being stalked. My instincts were screaming that I was in danger. The elevator doors opened and I rushed across the empty lobby, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. I burst out the front doors into the rainy night, not even bothering to open my umbrella as I sprinted to my car. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them in the lock. As I finally wrenched the door open, movement in my peripheral vision made me freeze. Slowly, I turned to look back at the building entrance. The hooded figure stood there motionless once again, their gaze locked onto me. Even from this distance, I could feel the weight of their stare. My chest constricted with fear as I scrambled into my car and peeled out of the parking lot. The whole drive home, I obsessively checked my rearview mirror, convinced I'd see headlights following me. But the roads were deserted in the downpour. I made it home without incident, though I didn't start to relax until I was safely inside with the doors locked. I barely slept that night, jumping at every noise and shadow. The next day, I called in sick to work. I couldn't face going back there, couldn't shake the feeling that I'd narrowly escaped something terrible. When I finally worked up the courage to return to the office a few days later, everything seemed normal. My co-workers were oblivious to my inner turmoil as I nervously glanced around, half expecting to see that sinister hooded figure materialize at any moment. I asked our receptionist if there had been any security issues or strange visitors lately. She gave me an odd look and said, no, everything had been quiet. I wanted to believe it had all just been my imagination running wild that night. But I knew what I saw. The visceral fear I'd felt was all too real. In the weeks that followed, I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder. I avoided staying late at the office and hurried to my car after work, keys clutched tightly in my fist. Sometimes I could swear I caught glimpses of a hooded figure out of the corner of my eye, in store windows, across busy streets, in the shadows of parking garages. But when I'd look directly, there would be nothing there. Was I losing my mind? Or was I still being watched, stalked by some malevolent presence for reasons I couldn't begin to fathom? The not knowing was almost worse than the fear itself. It's been months now, and I still don't have any answers. The rational part of my brain tells me it was all just a bizarre, one-time encounter, likely some unstable person who wandered off and forgot all about me. But in my darkest moments, usually late at night when I'm alone, I'm gripped by the certainty that they're still out there, waiting, watching, and that someday our paths will cross again. I don't know if I'll ever feel truly safe again. The smallest things set me on edge now. A flicker of movement in my peripheral vision, an unexpected shadow, the weight of a stranger's gaze lingering a moment too long. That night fundamentally changed me, leaving me with a constant undercurrent of paranoia and dread that I can't seem to shake. Sometimes I wonder if that was the point all along, not to physically harm me, but to make me question my safety, my sanity, my very perception of reality. If so, mission accomplished. Because even now, as I type this, I can't help but glance nervously over my shoulder, half expecting to see that haunting hooded figure standing silently behind me, watching, always watching. It was close to midnight when I first heard it, a strange rustling sound coming from the backyard. At first, I didn't think much of it. We get all kinds of critters out here in the country, and I figured it was probably just a raccoon or possum rooting around for food. But something about it niggled at me, and I found myself pausing to listen more closely. The sound came again, louder this time. It didn't quite fit with the usual noises of nocturnal animals. There was something deliberate about it. My skin prickled uneasily as I moved towards the back door, peering out through the small window. At first, I couldn't see anything through the sheets of rain, but as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I noticed a shape at the edge of my yard, right where it bordered the dense woods beyond. My breath caught in my throat as I realized it was the unmistakable silhouette of a person. They were just standing there, perfectly still, staring directly at my house. I blinked hard, sure I must be seeing things, but when I looked again, the figure was still there. A chill ran down my spine as I tried to make out more details. It looked to be an adult, probably male based on the build, but I couldn't see any distinguishing features, just a dark form, motionless in the pouring rain. My mind raced, trying to come up with some innocent explanation. Maybe it was a lost hiker seeking shelter. But why would they just stand there instead of coming to the door? And who would be hiking at this time of night, in this weather? I debated what to do. Should I call out to them? Pretend I hadn't seen anything and go to bed? Call the police? Part of me wanted to just ignore it and hope they'd go away. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. Taking a deep breath to steel my nerves, I flicked on the porch light. The figure didn't react at all, didn't even flinch at the sudden illumination. They just kept staring, utterly still. Now that I could see better, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The person appeared to be holding something long and thin, a stick or maybe a pipe of some kind. My imagination immediately leapt to worst-case scenarios involving weapons. Hello? I called out hesitantly, my voice shaking slightly. Can I help you with something? No response, not even a twitch. Look, I don't want any trouble, I continued, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. If you need help, just let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Still nothing. It was like talking to a statue, an incredibly creepy, potentially dangerous statue. By this point, my heart was pounding so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. Every instinct was screaming at me that this was not normal, not okay. I fumbled for my phone with shaking hands, never taking my eyes off the ominous figure in my yard. As I dialed 911, I half expected the person to suddenly lunge towards the house, but they remained frozen in place, an unblinking sentinel in the rain. I wasn't sure if that was more or less terrifying than if they had moved. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's calm voice was like a lifeline. I quickly explained the situation, my words tumbling out in a rush. The dispatcher assured me they were sending officers right away and advised me to stay inside with the doors locked. Those next 15 minutes were the longest of my life. I paced nervously, alternating between peeking out the window and hiding away from it. The strange figure never budged an inch. I found myself wondering if I was hallucinating, if the stress of my job and recent breakup had finally made me crack. But every time I looked, they were still there, all too real. When I finally saw the patrol cars' flashing lights coming up my long driveway, the relief was overwhelming. I hurried to the front door to let the officers in, explaining again what I'd seen as I led them to the back of the house. But when we looked out the window, the yard was empty. The figure had vanished without a trace. The police did a thorough search of the property, but found nothing. No footprints in the muddy ground, no broken branches or disturbed leaves where someone might have fled into the woods. It was as if the person had never been there at all. I could tell the officers were skeptical, though they were polite about it. I'm sure they thought I was just some jumpy city transplant, spooked by the unfamiliar noises of country life. Maybe I dozed off in front of the TV and had a particularly vivid nightmare. I almost wanted to believe that myself. But I know what I saw. That silhouette is burned into my memory, along with the visceral feeling of wrongness it inspired. I haven't been able to shake the dread that settled over me since that night. I've installed security cameras and motion-activated lights all around the property. I keep the curtains drawn tight as soon as the sun starts to set, but it doesn't help. I still lie awake at night, straining to hear any out-of-place sounds over the pounding of my own heart. Sometimes, in my darkest moments, I wonder if the figure is still out there somewhere, waiting, watching. I tell myself that's ridiculous, that I'm letting my imagination run wild. But then I'll catch a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye, or hear an unexplained creak from somewhere in the house, and that primal fear comes rushing back. I've thought about moving, but the idea of trying to sell this place feels impossible. Who would want to buy a house with this kind of baggage? And what if whatever it was followed me? The thought makes me break out in a cold sweat, so I stay, jumping at shadows and flinching at every unexpected noise, always wondering if tonight will be the night I look out my window and see that motionless figure once again, standing at the edge of the dark woods, waiting, watching. I don't know if I'll ever feel truly safe here again. The sanctity of my home has been shattered, leaving me feeling exposed and vulnerable in what should be my place of refuge. That single night changed everything, and I'm not sure I'll ever be the same. I know how it sounds. Trust me, I've replayed it in my head 1,000 times, looking for some rational explanation. But I can't escape the conviction that what I experienced was real, that for reasons I may never understand, something sinister came calling that rainy night in Virginia. And the truly terrifying part, I have no idea if it will ever come back. As I pulled into the gravel parking lot, I got an uneasy feeling. The place looked completely deserted. No other cars, no lights on in any of the rooms. But I was desperate for sleep, so I decided to check it out anyway. I walked up to the office and tried the door. To my surprise, it was unlocked. I called out, but no one answered. The interior was dark and musty, like no one had been there in years, but there was a key rack on the wall with room keys still hanging. I hesitated, then grabbed a key for room 13. I figured I'd just crash for the night and leave some cash on the counter in the morning. The door to room 13 creaked loudly as I opened it. A thick layer of dust covered every surface, but the bed looked relatively clean, so I flopped down, not even bothering to take off my shoes. Within minutes, I was drifting off to sleep. I'm not sure how long I was out before the noises started. At first, it was just faint whispers that I couldn't quite make out. I tried to ignore them, thinking I was dreaming, but they got louder, more insistent. I sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. The whispers seemed to be coming from all around me, but I couldn't understand what they were saying. My heart started racing as I strained to listen. That's when I heard footsteps outside my door. Slow, dragging footsteps moving back and forth in the walkway. I held my breath, hoping whoever it was would pass by. But they stopped right in front of my room. There was a long moment of silence. Then 3 loud knocks on the door made me jump. "Hello," a raspy voice called out. "Anyone in there?" I didn't answer. Maybe if I stayed quiet, they'd go away. But then the doorknob started to rattle. I watched in horror as it slowly began to turn. I leapt out of bed and pressed my full weight against the door, praying the old lock would hold. The rattling got more aggressive. "I know you're in there," the voice growled. "Let me in." Panic overtook me. I looked around frantically for an escape route. The bathroom window was small, but I thought I might be able to squeeze through. I made a dash for it, hearing wood splinter as the door began to give way. Just as I got the window open, the main door burst inward with a crash. I didn't look back. I just dove headfirst out the window. I hit the ground hard and scrambled to my feet, ignoring the pain. I ran blindly into the dark desert, my lungs burning. After what felt like hours, I finally slowed down. I was lost, with no idea which direction the highway was. As the adrenaline faded, the terror of what just happened hit me full force. What the hell was that thing in the motel? Why did it want to get to me so badly? I wandered through the night, jumping at every sound. When the sun finally rose, I was able to find my way back to the road. I flagged down the first car I saw and begged for a ride to the nearest town. I've tried to make sense of what happened that night, but I still have no explanation. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing, but then I remember the pure fear I felt, and I know it was real. I'll never forget that voice, or the sound of that door splintering, and I'll certainly never stay in an abandoned motel again. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that something was after me in that desert, something that didn't want me to leave. I'm just grateful I managed to escape, and I hope I never encounter anything like that again. My GPS wasn't working out here in the sticks, so I just kept driving, hoping to find a main road or some sign of civilization. But the farther I went, the more lost I felt. The narrow dirt road was turning into mud, my tires spinning as I crept along at 15 mph. Dense woods pressed in on both sides, the trees looking like gnarled fingers reaching for my car in the gloom. I was starting to get really anxious. My gas tank was less than a quarter full, and I had no idea where I was or how to get back to the highway. Just as I was debating whether to turn around, my headlights suddenly illuminated another vehicle about 50 yards ahead. Relief washed over me. Finally, another person. Maybe they could give me directions. But as I got closer, I realized the other car wasn't moving. It was just sitting there in the middle of the road, no lights on. I slowed to a crawl, squinting through the rain-lashed windshield. It looked like an old station wagon, all boxy and rusted. I couldn't see anyone inside. My relief quickly turned to unease. Why would someone just be parked out here in the middle of nowhere on a night like this? I flashed my brights, hoping to get their attention. But there was no response. The hairs on the back of my neck started to prickle. I didn't want to stop, but I couldn't get around them on the narrow road. Mud and dense underbrush hemmed me in on both sides. Tentatively, I inched forward until I was about 20 feet behind them. My fingers tightened on the steering wheel as I debated what to do. Suddenly, the other car's brake lights flared to life, glowing an eerie red in the darkness. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, so there was someone in there after all, but still they didn't move. "Come on, buddy," I muttered. "Get going or let me pass." As if in response, the car lurched forward a few feet, then stopped again. What the hell? Were they messing with me? My unease ratcheted up another notch. I laid on the horn, the sound shockingly loud in the quiet night. The other car didn't budge. Frustration started to overtake my anxiety. I was cold, tired, and just wanted to get home. I leaned out my window. "Hey!" I shouted. "You need to move. I can't get by." For a long moment there was no response. Then slowly, so slowly, a hand emerged from the driver's side window. But instead of waving or gesturing, it just hung there, limp and pale in the glow of my headlights. I stared at it, my brain struggling to make sense of what I was seeing. Then the hand started to move. Not naturally, but in jerky, twitching motions. The fingers splayed and contracted rapidly, like it was caught in some kind of spasm. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the damp night air. Before I could react, there was a metallic scraping sound and the back door of the station wagon swung open. But no one got out. The door just creaked back and forth in the wind, revealing a pitch-black interior. My heart was hammering now. Every instinct screamed at me to get out of there, but I was trapped. I couldn't go forward, and I didn't dare try to back up in the mud and darkness. I was hyperventilating, my breath fogging up the windows. A flash of lightning briefly illuminated the scene, and in that split second I saw something that turned my blood to ice. A face, pale and distorted, pressed against the back window of the station wagon. But it wasn't looking at me. Its head was twisted at an impossible angle, staring up at the car's ceiling with blank, glassy eyes. I screamed and fumbled for the lock button, my hands shaking so badly I could barely manage it. I didn't know what was going on, but I knew I had to get out of there now. Just then, something slammed into the side of my car with tremendous force. The whole vehicle rocked, and I heard the shriek of metal on metal. I whipped my head around but couldn't see anything through the rain-streaked windows. Another impact, this time on the roof. It sounded like something heavy had landed on top of the car. I cowered in my seat, covering my head with my arms. What the hell was happening? The sounds of scraping filled the air as whatever was up there started to move. I could hear the roof denting inward and felt sick with terror. This couldn't be real. It had to be a nightmare. Suddenly there was a tapping on my window, soft at first, then louder, more insistent. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing it to go away. But the tapping continued, turning into a pounding. Against my better judgment, I slowly turned to look. Through the foggy glass, I could make out a vague shape. It looked almost human, but somehow wrong. The proportions were off, the limbs too long and jointed in strange places. As I stared in horror, a hand pressed against the window. The fingers were unnaturally thin and elongated, the nails curved into wicked points. They scraped down the glass with a sound that set my teeth on edge. I don't know what broke me out of my paralysis. Maybe it was when I saw the thing's face start to come into focus, features twisting into something inhuman. Or maybe it was pure survival instinct kicking in. But suddenly I was jamming the car into reverse, not caring about the mud or the rain or anything except getting away from that thing. My tires spun uselessly for a heart-stopping moment. Then they found purchase, and I was flying backward down the road, much too fast for the conditions. I caught a glimpse of the station wagon as I passed. It was empty now, the doors hanging open. Whatever had been inside was gone. I don't know how long I drove, or how I managed to stay on the road. Everything was a blur of rain and trees and absolute terror. Eventually I burst out onto a main highway and just kept going until I saw lights ahead. It was a 24-hour truck stop. I pulled in and collapsed against the steering wheel, shaking uncontrollably. I must have fallen asleep there because the next thing I knew, it was dawn. Bleary-eyed truckers were fueling up around me, giving my mud-caked car strange looks. I sat up, wincing at my stiff neck, and tried to collect my thoughts. In the light of day, it all seemed like a bad dream. Maybe I had hallucinated the whole thing from exhaustion and stress, but then I saw the dents in my roof and the long scratches down the side of the car. I never reported what happened. Who would believe me? I told my family and friends I had gotten lost and stuck in the mud overnight. But I'll never forget the terror of that night, or the lingering feeling that something is out there in those woods, something that's not supposed to exist. I don't drive on back roads at night anymore, and I always check my back seat before getting in the car. Because ever since that night, I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched, that whatever I encountered out there might have followed me home. I set out early on a Tuesday morning in late June, my backpack loaded with supplies for a week-long journey. The weather was perfect, sunny and mild with a light breeze rustling through the trees. As I embarked on the trail, I felt a sense of excitement and freedom wash over me. This was what I lived for, just me and the great outdoors. The first couple days were absolutely idyllic. I hiked for hours each day, taking in the breathtaking mountain vistas and lush forests. At night, I'd make camp, cook a simple meal over my portable stove, and fall asleep under a canopy of stars. I encountered a few other friendly hikers along the way, but for the most part, it was blissfully solitary. Everything changed on the third day. I had just finished setting up camp for the evening when I noticed smoke from another campfire nearby. As I was eating my dinner, 3 men emerged from the woods and approached my sight. They looked to be in their 30s or 40s, scruffy and unkempt. Something about them immediately set me on edge, but I tried to push away my unease. "Hey there," called out the tallest one as they got closer. "Mind if we join you for a bit? Always nice to have some company out here." Not wanting to seem rude or paranoid, I hesitantly agreed. The men introduced themselves as Mike, Dave, and John. They seemed friendly enough at first, asking about my trip and sharing stories of their own hiking adventures. But as the night wore on, I began to pick up on subtle red flags. They kept pressing me for details about my itinerary and how long I planned to be on the trail. Mike made a point of mentioning how isolated this section was, how you could go days without seeing another soul. John kept eyeing my expensive hiking gear with an unsettling intensity. My instincts were screaming at me that something wasn't right. I made an excuse about being tired and retreated to my tent, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread in the pit of my stomach. Sleep evaded me as I lay there hyper-alert, straining to hear any sounds of movement outside. Just before dawn, I was startled awake by voices right outside my tent. The men were talking in low, urgent tones. I caught snippets about taking him deeper in and no one will find him there. My blood ran cold as I realized the mortal danger I was in. With shaking hands, I quickly and silently packed up my essential gear. I knew I had to get out of there immediately. As I was about to unzip my tent, I heard one of them say, "Let's wake him up now and get moving." Panic surged through me. There was no time left. I burst out of the tent and took off running into the woods as fast as I could. Behind me I heard shouts of anger and the sounds of pursuit. I ran blindly through the dense forest, branches whipping my face and roots threatening to trip me with every step. My lungs burned and my legs ached, but raw fear kept me going. I could hear them crashing through the underbrush behind me, getting closer. In desperation, I veered off the trail and plunged down a steep, rocky slope. I lost my footing and tumbled painfully down the hillside, coming to a stop in a shallow creek bed. For a terrifying moment, I thought I'd seriously injured myself. But adrenaline took over and I scrambled to my feet, splashing through the creek to throw off my scent. I don't know how long I ran for. It felt like hours. Eventually the sounds of pursuit faded and I collapsed against a tree, gasping for air. As the initial panic subsided, crushing waves of fear and confusion washed over me. What the hell had just happened? Who were those men and what did they want with me? I knew I couldn't stay put. They could still be searching the area. So I gathered what remained of my strength and kept moving, trying to put as much distance between us as possible. I had no idea where I was or which direction to go. My only goal was to find help or civilization. It was late afternoon when I finally stumbled upon a gravel road. Relief flooded through me at this sign of humanity. I followed the road for another mile before coming across a small ranger station. I burst through the door, wild-eyed and disheveled. The 2 rangers on duty were alarmed by my appearance and obvious distress. Between ragged breaths, I managed to choke out my story. Their faces grew grave as I described the 3 men and their threatening behavior. "You're lucky you got away," one of the rangers told me. We've had reports of a group matching that description harassing other hikers in the area. There have been some assaults and robberies. We've been trying to track them down. They radioed for backup and sent out patrols to search for the men, though I knew the chance of finding them was slim. The rangers drove me to the nearest town where I gave a formal statement to the police. They commended me for trusting my instincts and escaping when I did. I spent that night tossing and turning in a motel room, jumping at every little sound. The events of the day played on a nightmarish loop in my head. I kept imagining what might have happened if I hadn't gotten away. In the harsh light of morning, I made a decision. I was done with hiking, at least for the foreseeable future. The peace and solitude I once cherished now felt dangerous and isolating. I couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability, of being hunted. I took the first bus home, leaving most of my gear behind. For weeks afterwards, I battled anxiety and insomnia. Every unexpected noise made me flinch. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, unable to relax. It's been almost a year now, and I still haven't set foot on a hiking trail. My expensive backpacking gear gathers dust in the closet. Friends invite me on camping trips, but I always decline. I can't bring myself to be alone in the wilderness again. I know logically that what happened to me was a rare occurrence. Thousands of people hike the Appalachian Trail every year without incident. But logic can't erase the visceral memory of terror, of running for my life through those dark woods. Sometimes I miss the freedom and beauty of the trail, but then I remember those predatory eyes in the firelight, those voices discussing my fate outside my tent. And I know I made the right choice in walking away from that life. I don't know if I'll ever fully get over what happened, but I'm working on it, one day at a time. For now, I'll stick to well-populated parks and nature preserves close to home. Maybe someday I'll feel safe in the backcountry again. But that day is not today, and I've made peace with that. If there's one thing I learned from this harrowing experience, it's to always trust your gut instinct. That primal sense of danger exists for a reason. In the wilderness especially, your instincts can mean the difference between life and death. I'm just grateful mine kicked in when they did, allowing me to escape and tell this cautionary tale. To anyone planning a solo hiking trip, please be careful out there. Let people know your plans. Carry emergency gear, and above all else, listen to that little voice inside when it tells you something isn't right. Nature can be breathtakingly beautiful, but it can also harbor real dangers, both natural and human. Stay safe, stay alert, and maybe consider finding a reliable hiking buddy. I know I won't be going it alone ever again. I was an avid hiker, always seeking out new trails to explore on my own. That fateful day in the Smoky Mountains of Tennessee started like any other solo trek. The weather was perfect, crisp autumn air, leaves crunching underfoot, shafts of golden sunlight filtering through the canopy. I felt alive and at peace as I made my way deeper into the wilderness. About 2 hours in, I veered off onto a less-traveled side trail, relishing the solitude. The path narrowed and grew overgrown, but I pressed on, drawn by the raw beauty of my surroundings. That's when I first sensed something was off. An eerie stillness had settled over the forest. No birdsong, no rustling in the underbrush, just a heavy, oppressive silence. Rounding a bend, I froze. Ahead lay a small clearing with a hastily abandoned campsite. Gear was strewn about haphazardly. A tent, partially collapsed, sleeping bags unrolled. But what made my blood run cold were the signs of violence, deep gouges in the earth, as if from a struggle, and most chilling of all, dark stains spattered across the leaves and pine needles. Blood, fresh blood. My heart pounding, I debated what to do. I should turn back, alert the authorities, but a morbid curiosity took hold. I had to know what happened here. Taking a deep breath, I followed a trail of blood droplets leading away from the camp. The trail wound deeper into increasingly dense forest. Branches snagged at my clothes as I pushed through thickets, my senses on high alert. After about 10 minutes, I heard voices up ahead, low guttural murmurs that sent chills down my spine. I crouched behind a fallen log, peering through the foliage. What I saw next will haunt me for the rest of my days. 3 figures dressed head to toe in black stalked through the underbrush about 50 yards ahead. They moved with an unnatural, predatory grace, more animal than human. One carried what looked like a wicked, curved blade. Another clutched some kind of makeshift club. They were clearly tracking something, or someone, searching, hunting. My mind reeled, trying to make sense of the nightmarish scene before me. Who were these people? What were they after? And what the hell happened back at that campsite? I knew I had to get out of there fast. But as I slowly backed away, my boot caught on a root. I stumbled, snapping a twig underfoot. The sound was deafening in the oppressive silence. 3 black-clad heads whipped around in unison, locking onto my position. For a split second, we stared at each other, frozen. Then survival instinct kicked in, and I ran. I tore through the forest in blind panic, branches whipping my face as I crashed through the underbrush. I could hear them pursuing, swift, nearly silent footfalls and guttural snarls. My lungs burned as I sprinted faster than I ever had in my life. I lost all sense of direction, driven by pure animal terror. Brambles tore at my clothes and skin. I hurdled fallen logs and splashed through icy streams. Still they pursued, relentless. How could they move so fast through this dense forest? Just when I thought my legs would give out, I burst onto a wider maintained trail. To my immense relief, I saw a group of day hikers about 100 yards ahead. I screamed for help, my voice cracking with desperation. The hikers turned, startled by my frantic appearance. I risked a glance behind me. Nothing. No sign of my pursuers. They had melted back into the wilderness as suddenly as they had appeared. I collapsed at the feet of the bewildered hikers, gasping for air and babbling incoherently about what I'd seen. They clearly thought I was unhinged, exchanging concerned looks. One of them had cell service and called the park rangers. The next few hours passed in a blur. Rangers arrived and I recounted my story. They sent out search parties but found no trace of the campsite or mysterious figures. No missing persons had been reported in the area. The rangers were skeptical but professional, assuring me they'd investigate further. I know how it must have sounded. Some deranged hiker ranting about men in black stalking the forest. But I know what I saw. The memory of those inhuman figures moving through the woods with preternatural grace is seared into my brain. The metallic scent of blood, the bone-deep terror as I ran for my life. That day changed me profoundly. I haven't set foot on a hiking trail since, too traumatized by the experience. My love of nature and solitude has been replaced by a gnawing anxiety. I find myself constantly looking over my shoulder, unable to shake the feeling of being watched, hunted. I've spent countless hours researching, trying to make sense of what happened. I've gone down rabbit holes of conspiracy theories and paranormal encounters, but nothing quite fits. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined it all, if the isolation and wilderness played tricks on my mind. But then I'll catch a glimpse of someone in black out of the corner of my eye, and that primal fear comes rushing back. I'm sharing this story now in hopes that someone out there might have experienced something similar, that I'm not alone in this. Because the alternative, that there really are inhuman predators stalking the wilderness is almost too terrifying to contemplate. All I know for certain is that something evil lurks in those Tennessee woods, something that defies explanation. And I thank God every day that I made it out alive. But a part of me wonders, what if they're still out there? What if they're still hunting? I used to find peace and solace in nature. Now I see only danger lurking behind every tree. The wilderness that once called to me now fills me with dread. I've tried therapy, medication, even hypnosis to try to move past the trauma. But nothing helps. The fear is always there, just below the surface. Sometimes I wake up in a cold sweat, certain I hear those guttural voices outside my window. I've become a prisoner of my own paranoia. I've withdrawn from friends and family, unable to explain the profound change in me. How can I make them understand the terror that now defines my existence? I often wonder about that abandoned campsite. Who were those campers? Did they escape like I did? Or did those things catch up to them? The not knowing is almost worse than what I witnessed. My mind conjures up horrific scenarios of what might have happened. I've considered going to the media with my story, but who would believe me? I'd be laughed off as a kook or attention seeker. So I stay silent, carrying this burden alone. But I felt compelled to share my experience here, in hopes that it might serve as a warning to others. If you're reading this and planning a solo hike in the Tennessee wilderness, please be careful. Stay on the main trails. Don't venture off alone. And if you sense something wrong, that eerie stillness, that feeling of being watched, trust your instincts and get out fast. I don't know if I'll ever fully recover from what happened that day. The experience shattered my worldview and sense of safety. But by sharing my story, I hope to find some closure. And maybe, just maybe, prevent someone else from stumbling into the nightmare I barely escaped. So if you're out there in the woods and you hear something moving in the underbrush, something too swift and silent to be natural, don't hesitate. Run. Run like your life depends on it, because it just might. I had planned to meet my friend Tom at the Guyot shelter, about 8 miles into our planned route. We often did weekend backpacking trips together, but this time he had gotten a head start the day before. I wasn't worried when I didn't see him at our rendezvous point. Tom was an experienced hiker and probably just continued on to the next shelter. As I approached Guyot in the early afternoon, I noticed another hiker coming from the opposite direction. He was a tall, lanky guy, probably in his 40s, with a scruffy beard and worn hiking gear. Nothing seemed off about him at first. "Hey there," he called out as we got closer. "You haven't seen my buddy Mark around, have you? We got separated a while back and I've been trying to find him." I shook my head. "Sorry, haven't seen anyone else on the trail today. I'm actually looking for my friend Tom, too. We were supposed to meet up here." The man's eyes lit up. "Oh, really? What a coincidence. Maybe they're hiking together. What does your Tom look like?" I described Tom, average height and build, dark hair, probably wearing his favorite red fleece. The stranger nodded enthusiastically. "You know, I think I might have passed him earlier. Does he have a black backpack with a Canadian flag patch?" My heart leapt. That sounded exactly like Tom's pack. "Yeah, that's him. Where did you see him?" "Oh, maybe 3 or 4 miles back that way," he said, gesturing vaguely behind him. "He was moving pretty quick. If we hustle, we can probably catch up to him and my buddy." I hesitated for a moment. I had planned to take a break at the shelter, but the thought of catching up to Tom was tempting. Plus, I felt a little bad for this guy who had lost his hiking partner. safety in numbers and all that. All right, let's go for it, I agreed. I'm Jack, by the way. Nice to meet you, Jack. I'm Steve, he replied with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. We set off down the trail at a brisk pace. Steve kept up a steady stream of chatter as we hiked, asking me about my background and experience. I found myself sharing more than I normally would with a stranger. Where I was from, my job, how often I came to these mountains. He seemed friendly enough, but something about his intensity made me a bit uneasy. After about an hour of hiking, I was starting to get concerned. We should have caught up to Tom by now if Steve's timeline was accurate. When I mentioned this, Steve just shrugged it off. These trails can be deceptive. I'm sure we'll run into them soon. So tell me more about your friend Tom. How long have you known him? I answered Steve's questions, but my unease was growing. His own answers about his friend Mark were vague and inconsistent. At one point he said they'd been hiking together for years, but later mentioned it was Mark's first backpacking trip. Little details that didn't quite add up. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself watching Steve more closely. The way he moved on the trail seemed off somehow, not quite like an experienced hiker. And I noticed he kept glancing back at me when he thought I wasn't looking. My chest tightened as a chilling realization began to set in. What if there was no Mark? What if there was no Tom up ahead? What if this man had somehow known about Tom, used that information to gain my trust and lure me out here? I tried to stay calm, to convince myself I was just being paranoid, but every instinct was screaming at me that something was very, very wrong. "Hey, Steve," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's getting pretty late. Maybe we should turn back to the shelter for the night and try again tomorrow." Steve's face darkened for just a moment before his friendly smile returned. "Oh, come on. We're almost there. I'm sure it's just around the next bend. Let's keep going a bit further." I nodded, not wanting to tip him off to my suspicions, but internally I was in full-on panic mode. I needed to get away from this man, and fast. As we rounded a bend in the trail, I spotted a small clearing off to the side. "Hey, I need to take a quick bathroom break," I said casually. "I'll just duck in there for a minute." Steve's eyes narrowed slightly. "Sure thing. I'll wait right here." I walked into the clearing, making sure to stay within his line of sight, but as soon as I was behind a large tree, I took off running as quietly as I could through the underbrush. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he must be able to hear it. I had only made it about 50 yards when I heard Steve shout behind me, "Hey, where do you think you're going?" Abandoning all pretense of stealth, I broke into a full sprint. Branches whipped at my face as I crashed through the forest, veering away from the trail. I could hear Steve crashing through the woods behind me, gaining ground quickly with his longer legs. Just when I thought my lungs would burst, I burst out of the tree line onto another hiking trail, and there, like a miracle, were 3 other hikers heading my direction. "Help!" I gasped out. "Please help me!" The 3 men, who I later learned were named Jed, Ryan, and Baker, quickly took in the situation. As Steve emerged from the woods behind me, they immediately positioned themselves between us. "What's going on here?" the oldest of the 3 demanded. Steve tried to laugh it off, claiming it was just a misunderstanding between friends. But I quickly blurted out the whole story, how he had lured me away from the shelter, the inconsistencies in his story, my growing fear. The 3 hikers exchanged grim looks. "We're going to get you out of here safely," Jed assured me. "This guy isn't going anywhere near you." What followed was the tensest hour of my life as we hiked back towards the trailhead. Steve followed at a distance, alternating between trying to convince everyone it was a mistake and making vague threats. The three men stayed close around me, with Ryan keeping a hand on his trekking pole like a weapon. When we finally reached the parking area, I've never been so relieved to see other people and cars. Steve melted away into the woods as soon as we were in sight of the lot. Jed insisted on driving me to the nearest ranger station to report what had happened. The rangers took my statement and said they would investigate, but I never heard anything more about it. They did confirm that no one matching Tom's description had checked in at any of the shelters or trailheads. To this day, I don't know if my friend was somehow involved or if Steve had just gotten lucky in his lies. It's been years, but I still get chills thinking about what might have happened if I hadn't trusted my instincts, if those other hikers hadn't shown up when they did. I still love the mountains, but I never hike alone anymore. And I'm always wary of overly friendly strangers on the trail, no matter how harmless they might seem at first. I don't know if Steve was just a thief looking to steal gear, or if he had much darker intentions, but I'm grateful I never had to find out. Remember to trust your gut out there, folks. Sometimes paranoia is just good sense in disguise. About 2 hours into my hike, I came across a man lying on the ground, just off the trail. He was clutching his ankle and moaning in pain. My heart immediately went out to him. I'd twisted my ankle on hikes before and knew how excruciating it could be, especially when you're miles from help. "Hey there, are you all right?" I called out as I approached. The man looked up at me with an expression of relief. "Oh, thank God," he said. "I twisted my ankle really bad about an hour ago. I've been trying to hobble back, but the pain is too much. Could you maybe help me get back to the trailhead?" Of course, I agreed without hesitation. I'm always happy to help a fellow hiker in need. As I got closer and crouched down next to him, I noticed he was a bit scruffy looking, tattered clothes, unkempt beard. But I didn't think much of it at the time. Plenty of through hikers look a bit rough around the edges. I set my backpack down and started rummaging through it for my first aid kit. "Let me take a look at that ankle and see if I can wrap it up for you," I said. But as I turned back towards him, I saw his expression had completely changed. The pained grimace was gone, replaced by a cold, predatory stare that made my blood run cold. Before I could react, he lunged at me with shocking speed, tackling me to the ground. The impact knocked the wind out of me. As I gasped for air, my mind reeled, trying to process what was happening. This couldn't be real, but the crushing weight on my chest and the calloused hands gripping my throat were undeniably, terrifyingly real. "Don't move," he snarled, his rancid breath hot on my face. "Give me your pack, your phone, and your wallet, now." Panic and adrenaline surged through me. This was no injured hiker. It was an ambush, a trap to lure in unsuspecting victims, and I had walked right into it. In that moment, survival instinct took over. I thrashed wildly, trying to throw him off balance. My elbow connected with his jaw, and I heard a satisfying crack. He howled in pain, and his grip loosened just enough for me to wrench free. I scrambled to my feet and took off running down the trail as fast as my legs would carry me. I could hear him cursing and crashing through the underbrush behind me. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. I ran blindly, heedless of the branches whipping at my face and the roots threatening to trip me. All I knew was that I had to put as much distance between myself and that madman as possible. But the forest was thick and the trail narrow. I could hear him gaining on me. Desperation mounting, I veered off the trail and plunged into the dense woods. It was risky. I could easily get lost or injured. But I hoped the thick vegetation might slow my pursuer down or cause him to lose my trail. I crashed through thickets and scrambled over fallen logs, my lungs burning for air. Thorns tore at my clothes and skin, but I barely felt it. The only thing that mattered was escape. After what felt like an eternity of frantic flight, I finally slowed and tried to get my bearings. The woods were eerily quiet, save for my ragged breathing. I strained my ears for any sound of pursuit, but heard nothing. Had I lost him? I allowed myself a moment to slump against a tree and try to calm my racing heart. As the adrenaline faded, the reality of my situation began to sink in. I was alone in the wilderness, off trail, with no supplies or way to call for help. My phone and pack were back where I'd encountered that maniac, and for all I knew, he could still be out there hunting for me. Forcing down the rising panic, I tried to think rationally. I needed to find my way back to a trail or road. But which direction? Everything looked the same, just an endless sea of trees and undergrowth. The thick canopy obscured the sun, robbing me of even that basic means of navigation. I picked a direction that seemed promising and started walking, trying to move as quietly as possible while still making decent time. Every snapping twig or rustle of leaves sent a jolt of fear through me. Was it just the wind, or was he closing in for another attack? The afternoon wore on, and despair began to set in. I was hopelessly lost, dehydrated and exhausted. The temperature was dropping as evening approached. If I didn't find my way out soon, I'd be forced to spend the night in the woods. A dangerous prospect even without a potential killer on the loose. Just as I was on the verge of giving up hope, I heard voices in the distance, human voices. I wanted to shout for joy, but caution held me back. What if it was him? What if he had friends? I crept closer, moving as silently as I could. As I neared, I was able to make out bits of cheerful conversation and laughter. It didn't sound like the kind of talk hardened criminals would be having. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out into view. "Help!" I called out, my voice cracking. "Please, I need help!" The group, two couples out for a day hike, turned towards me in shock. I must have been quite a sight. Clothes torn and dirty, covered in scratches, wild-eyed with fear and exhaustion. They rushed to my aid as I stumbled towards them. Through gasping sobs, I managed to convey the basics of what had happened. They were horrified and immediately offered to escort me back to the ranger station. As we hiked out, I kept glancing nervously over my shoulder, half expecting to see that crazed attacker emerge from the woods at any moment. But we made it back to the trailhead without incident. The rangers were alarmed by my story and immediately sent out patrols to search for the man, though they were doubtful of finding him given the vast expanse of wilderness. In the days and weeks that followed, I gave statements to the police and Park Service. They never did catch the guy. Sometimes I wonder if he's still out there, preying on unsuspecting hikers. The thought makes me shudder. It's been months since that harrowing day, but the trauma lingers. I have nightmares where I'm back in those woods, running for my life as an unseen predator closes in. I haven't been able to bring myself to go hiking since, even on popular, well-traveled trails. The forest that once brought me so much peace now fills me with dread. I know I was incredibly lucky to escape. If I hadn't managed to break free in that initial struggle, who knows what would have happened to me. I might have become just another missing hiker, my fate forever unknown. I'm sharing this story as a warning to others. We like to think of nature as a peaceful refuge, but the sad reality is that there are dangerous people out there who prey on that sense of security. Always be aware of your surroundings, even in seemingly safe places. Don't let your guard down around strangers, no matter how harmless they may appear. And trust your instincts, If something feels off, it probably is. I hope that someday I'll be able to overcome this fear and return to the trails I once loved. But for now, the memory of that day haunts me. The serenity of the forest has been forever tainted by the evil that lurked within it. I can only hope that by sharing my experience, I might help prevent others from falling victim to similar traps. Stay safe out there, fellow hikers. The dangers aren't always obvious, but they are very, very real. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I realized the campfire had completely died out. That was strange. We usually kept it burning through the night to ward off animals. I fumbled for my flashlight and unzipped the tent, stepping out into the chilly night. "Hey guys, the fire went out," I called softly, not wanting to wake everyone if they were still asleep. But as I swung my light around the clearing, my blood ran cold. The other 4 tents were all unzipped and empty. "Hello?" I said, louder this time. "Mike? Jen? Where is everyone?" Only the rustling of leaves in the wind answered me. Panic started to set in as I frantically searched the campsite. Their sleeping bags were still in the tents, but there was no sign of my friends anywhere. I tried to stay calm and think rationally. Maybe they had all gotten up to use the bathroom and just forgot to zip up their tents. But all 4 of them at once, in the middle of the night? It didn't make sense. As I paced around the clearing, my light caught something strange on the ground near the tree line. Faint drag marks in the dirt, as if something heavy had been pulled into the forest. My hands shook as I followed the trail, pushing through the undergrowth. The marks continued deeper into the woods, occasionally accompanied by broken branches or trampled ferns. Whatever had made these tracks was large and didn't seem to care about stealth. After what felt like an eternity of stumbling through the dark forest, I emerged into a small clearing. What I saw there made my blood turn to ice in my veins. Arranged in a perfect circle were piles of clothing, 4 distinct sets that I recognized as belonging to my missing friends. Mike's red flannel shirt, Jen's hiking boots, Chris's beanie, Amy's jacket, all laid out as if the wearers had simply vanished into thin air, leaving their clothes behind. I stood there paralyzed, my mind reeling as it tried to make sense of the impossible scene before me. A twig snapped somewhere in the darkness behind me, and I whirled around, my light beam cutting through the shadows. For a split second, I caught a glimpse of a tall, dark figure standing at the edge of the clearing. It was unnaturally still, with what looked like a long black cloak obscuring its form. But what sent chills down my spine was its face, or rather, the lack of one. Where a head should have been, there was only an inky void of absolute darkness. I blinked, and it was gone, like a mirage evaporating in the desert. But I could feel its presence lingering, watching me from just beyond the reach of my light. Pure animal terror took over, and I ran. I crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face as I fled blindly through the forest. I had no idea which direction I was going. My only thought was to put as much distance between myself and that thing as possible. I don't know how long I ran. It could have been minutes or hours. Eventually, I burst out of the tree line onto the main trail, gasping for air and covered in scratches. As I stood there trying to catch my breath, a horrible realization dawned on me. I had no idea where our campsite was. In my panic, I had become hopelessly lost. The sun was just starting to peek over the horizon, bathing the mountains in an eerie pre-dawn glow. I picked a direction and started walking, praying I would come across a ranger station or another group of hikers. My legs felt like lead and my throat was parched, but fear kept me moving forward. It was mid-morning when I finally heard voices up ahead. I broke into a run, rounding a bend to find a group of day hikers getting ready to hit the trail. They looked startled by my sudden appearance. I must have been quite a sight, wild-eyed and covered in dirt and scratches. "Please, you have to help me," I croaked, my voice hoarse from dehydration. "My friends are missing. Something took them." The hikers exchanged concerned looks. One of them, an older man with a kind face, stepped forward. "Slow down, son. Tell us what happened." I poured out the whole terrifying story, waking up to find the others gone, following the tracks, discovering their clothes, and my encounter with the shadowy figure. As I spoke, I could see the doubt and skepticism growing in their eyes. I knew how it sounded, like the ravings of a madman or a cruel prank gone too far. But the genuine fear in my voice must have convinced them that something was truly wrong. They gave me water and trail mix while one of them hiked to the nearest area with cell service to call for help. The next few days were a blur of search parties, police interviews, and sleepless nights in the ranger station. They scoured the area where I said our camp had been, but found no trace of my friends or their belongings. The clearing with the circle of clothes was never located. I could tell the authorities thought I was either lying or had suffered some kind of mental break. They grilled me for hours, looking for inconsistencies in my story. But I stuck to the truth, as unbelievable as it was. After a week of fruitless searching, the official search was called off. My friends were listed as missing persons, their disappearance joining the long list of unsolved mysteries in the Appalachian wilderness. Their families were devastated, and I could see the accusation in their eyes every time they looked at me. The sole survivor, with a story too fantastic to be believed. I've spent countless hours since then poring over maps of the area, trying to retrace my steps that night. I've gone back multiple times, searching for any clue I might have missed. But it's like the forest erased all evidence of what happened. Sometimes I wonder if I did hallucinate the whole thing, if the isolation and darkness played tricks on my mind. But then I remember the bone-deep terror I felt in that clearing, the otherworldly wrongness of that faceless figure. And I know with absolute certainty that what I experienced was real. I still have nightmares about that night. I wake up in a cold sweat, convinced that I'll open my eyes to find myself back in that tent, with something unnatural lurking just outside. I haven't been camping since, and I don't think I ever will again. My friends are still out there somewhere. I don't know if they're alive or dead, if they're trapped in some other realm, or if that thing in the woods simply erased them from existence. But I'll never stop looking for answers. I owe them that much. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that I was meant to be taken too, that I was supposed to be the fifth pile of empty clothes in that clearing. Why was I spared when the others were taken? It's a question that haunts me every day. I'm sharing this story not because I expect anyone to believe me, but because I need to get it out. I need someone else to know what happened out there in those dark woods, and I need to warn others. Something ancient and malevolent lurks in the shadows of the Appalachian Trail. If you go there, be on your guard. And if you wake up in the night to find your campsite empty, don't follow the tracks. Run, and don't look back. Because if you catch a glimpse of that faceless figure in the trees, it may be the last thing you ever see. I was on a solo hiking trip in the dense forests of Maine, eager to disconnect from the world and immerse myself in nature. The trail I chose, was supposed to be a moderate challenge, winding through the lush green landscape for about 15 miles. I'd done my research, packed all the essentials, and felt prepared for a day of peaceful trekking. The morning started beautifully. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and the gentle sounds of birds chirping. I set out early, my backpack comfortably settled on my shoulders, a spring in my step as I looked forward to the day ahead. About 3 hours into my hike, I reached a fork in the trail that wasn't on my map. I paused, pulled out my compass, and tried to orient myself. That's when I heard footsteps approaching from behind. "Need some help there, friend?" a deep voice called out. I turned to see a man in what appeared to be a forest ranger uniform. He was tall, probably in his late 40s, with a scruffy beard and piercing blue eyes. Something about his appearance made me uneasy, though I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Yeah, I replied, trying to shake off my discomfort. "This fork isn't on my map. I'm trying to figure out which way to go." The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Ah, they must have added this trail recently. Don't worry, I know these woods like the back of my hand. I can guide you to a safe spot." I hesitated. His uniform looked slightly off. The patches seemed a bit crooked, and the color was a shade darker than I remembered seeing on other rangers. But then again, I wasn't an expert on ranger uniforms, and he seemed confident. "That's kind of you," I said, still uncertain. "But I don't want to take you away from your duties." He waved his hand dismissively. "Nonsense. It's my job to help hikers like yourself. Plus, there's a beautiful viewpoint not far from here. I'd be happy to show you." Against my better judgment, I agreed. We set off down the right fork, the supposed ranger leading the way. He introduced himself as Jack and started talking about the local wildlife and vegetation. His knowledge seemed impressive, but something in the back of my mind kept nagging at me. As we walked, I noticed we were moving deeper into the forest, away from the main trail. The trees grew denser and the underbrush thicker. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Jack," I called out, "are you sure this is the right way? It seems like we're getting pretty far from the main trail." He turned back to me, that same smile that didn't reach his eyes plastered on his face. "Trust me, I know a shortcut. We're almost there." My heart started to race. The way he said, "Trust me," sent chills down my spine. I began to lag behind, creating some distance between us. Jack noticed and slowed his pace, turning to face me. "Everything okay back there?" he asked, his tone suddenly less friendly. "Yeah, just catching my breath," I lied, trying to buy time as I frantically thought of a way out of this situation. Jack took a step towards me, and that's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Peeking out from under his jacket was what looked like the handle of a large hunting knife. In that moment, I knew I was in serious danger. This man wasn't a real ranger. He was leading me into a trap, and I had foolishly followed him. My mind raced, trying to figure out what to do. I was lost in the middle of the forest with a potentially dangerous man. Running seemed futile. He knew these woods better than I did, and I'd likely get even more lost. Jack must have sensed my growing unease because his demeanor changed entirely. The fake friendly smile disappeared, replaced by a cold, calculating look. "Why don't you come a little closer?" he said, his voice now menacing. "I've got something to show you." I froze, terror gripping me. I knew I had to act fast, but fear paralyzed me. Jack took another step forward, his hand moving towards his jacket, and then by some miracle, a loud crash echoed through the forest behind us. It sounded like a tree falling or a large branch snapping. Jack's head whipped around towards the noise, momentarily distracted. In that split second, Adrenaline surged through me. Without thinking, I turned and ran. I crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face and arms. I could hear Jack cursing and the sound of him pursuing me. I ran blindly, my only thought to put as much distance between myself and Jack as possible. My lungs burned and my legs ached, but fear pushed me forward. After what felt like an eternity, I burst out onto a wider trail. To my immense relief, I saw a group of hikers about 100 yards away. I sprinted towards them, shouting for help. The group, 2 men and a woman, looked startled as I approached. I must have been a sight, scratched up and wild-eyed with fear. "Please," I gasped, struggling to catch my breath. "There's a man. He's not a real ranger. He tried to—" I couldn't finish my sentence, but the urgency in my voice and my appearance told them enough. One of the men, a burly guy with a kind face, immediately stepped in front of me protectively. "It's okay. You're safe now," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Where is this man?" As if on cue, we heard rustling from the direction I'd come from. Jack emerged from the trees but stopped short when he saw the group. For a moment, we all stood frozen, staring at each other. Then Jack's demeanor changed again. He plastered on that fake smile and raised his hands in a gesture of innocence. "Oh, there you are," he called out to me. "I was worried when you ran off like that. These woods can be dangerous if you don't know your way around." The woman in the group narrowed her eyes. "Who are you?" she demanded. "I'm a forest ranger," Jack replied smoothly. "I was just helping this hiker find his way." "May we see some identification?" the burly man asked, his tone leaving no room for argument. Jack's smile faltered for a moment. He patted his pockets, then shrugged. "Must have left it in my truck. Listen, I should really be getting back to my rounds. You folks take care now." Before anyone could say anything else, Jack turned and disappeared back into the forest. The group quickly surrounded me, asking if I was okay and what had happened. I told them everything, my words tumbling out in a rush. They listened with growing concern, the woman already pulling out her phone to call the park authorities. As we waited for help to arrive, the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. I couldn't stop shaking, the adrenaline wearing off and leaving me feeling weak and nauseous. The group stayed with me, offering water and comforting words. When the real park rangers arrived, they took my statement and started a search for Jack, though they warned me he was likely long gone. I never found out who Jack really was or what his intentions were. The rangers told me there had been reports of a man impersonating park staff in the area, but they hadn't been able to catch him. That day in the main forest changed me. I'm much more cautious now, always trusting my instincts when something feels off. I still love hiking, but I never go alone anymore. Sometimes, when I'm in the woods, I think back to that moment when the sound of a falling branch saved my life. It was pure chance, a random act of nature that gave me the opportunity to escape. I'm grateful for it, but I also can't help but wonder, what if that branch hadn't fallen? What would have happened to me in those deep, dark woods? I'll never know the answer to that question, and honestly, I don't want to. All I know is that I'm lucky to be here, able to tell this story. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Always trust your gut, especially when you're out in the wilderness. Nature isn't the only danger lurking in the forest. I was an avid hiker, always seeking out new trails to explore in the dense forests of New Jersey. That fateful day in late October started like any other. I packed my backpack with water, snacks, and a first aid kit before heading out to a remote area I'd never hiked before. The crisp autumn air filled my lungs as I set off down the leaf-strewn path, relishing the solitude and natural beauty surrounding me. After about 2 hours of hiking, I noticed the trail becoming less defined. Fallen branches and overgrown vegetation made it difficult to follow at times. I started to wonder if I had somehow strayed off the main path. Just as I was considering turning back, I spotted what looked like a small wooden structure through the trees ahead. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to investigate. As I got closer, I saw it was an old, dilapidated cabin, partially hidden by the forest. It looked long abandoned, with weathered gray boards and a sagging roof. Something about it gave me an uneasy feeling, but I couldn't quite put my finger on why. I cautiously approached the cabin, leaves crunching under my boots. The door was slightly ajar, creaking eerily in the breeze. Against my better judgment, I decided to peek inside. I told myself I was just being nosy, but a nagging voice in the back of my mind warned me to turn back. Pushing open the door, I was hit by a musty, dank smell. Dust particles danced in the beams of sunlight filtering through cracks in the walls. The interior was sparse, just a rickety table, a couple chairs, and some shelves lining the walls. But what caught my eye immediately were the dozens of photographs tacked up all over the walls. My blood ran cold as I took a closer look at the photos. They were all candid shots of hikers on various trails, clearly taken without their knowledge. Some showed people resting by streams or admiring views. Others captured hikers walking alone on secluded paths. The sheer number of photos was staggering. There had to be hundreds. With shaking hands, I pulled one of the photos off the wall for a closer look. The date stamp in the corner showed it was taken just a few weeks ago. These weren't old photos. Someone was actively stalking and photographing hikers in these woods. My mind reeled as I tried to process what I was seeing. That's when I noticed the leather-bound book on the table. I hesitated for a moment before picking it up, my curiosity overcoming my growing sense of dread. As I flipped it open, I realized it was a journal or diary of some kind. The handwriting was messy and frantic, filling page after page with rambling entries. I started reading, my eyes widening in horror with each sentence. October 2nd. Spotted a lone female hiker on the East Trail today. Petite brunette, early 20s. Followed her for 3 miles before she left the area. Possible future target. October 7th. Group of 4 college-aged males camping by the river. Too risky to approach. Will monitor their movements. October 12th. Success. Intercepted the hiker from the 2nd. She never saw me coming. Subdued and transported to secondary location without incident. Details to follow. October 15th. Subject terminated. Disposal complete. No evidence remaining. My hands trembled as I flipped through more pages, each one detailing more stalking, abductions, and murders. This wasn't just the ravings of some madman. This was a methodical record of horrific crimes committed in these very woods. And based on the recent dates, the person responsible was still active. Panic seized me as I realized the implications. How many missing hikers over the years could be explained by the monster who wrote this? How long had this been going on? And most terrifyingly, was the cabin's occupant nearby right now? That last thought spurred me into action. I slammed the book shut and frantically looked around the cabin for any other clues or evidence. A worn hiking map on one wall caught my attention. It was covered in red X marks, presumably marking the locations of attacks or bodies. With trembling fingers, I snapped a photo of the map with my phone. Just then, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps crunching through leaves outside. My heart nearly stopped. Someone was approaching the cabin. Pure terror coursed through my veins as I looked for a place to hide. There was a small closet in the corner. I dove inside and pulled the door shut, praying it wouldn't be noticed. I could hear the cabin door creaking open, followed by heavy boot steps on the wooden floor. I held my breath, not daring to make a sound. The footsteps moved around the cabin slowly. I heard the rustling of papers and the scraping of chair legs. Minutes passed like hours as I cowered in the darkness of the closet, certain that at any moment the door would be flung open and I'd come face to face with a deranged killer. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, I heard the cabin door open and close again. The footsteps receded into the distance. I waited several more minutes to be sure before slowly, cautiously emerging from my hiding spot. The cabin looked undisturbed, just as I'd found it. Had I imagined the whole thing? No. The journal was in a slightly different position on the table. Someone had definitely been here. I knew I had to get out of there immediately. I took one last photo of the wall of pictures with my phone before bolting out the door. I ran faster than I ever had in my life, heedless of the branches whipping at my face. My only thought was putting as much distance between myself and that horrifying cabin as possible. It wasn't until I reached my car that I finally allowed myself to stop and catch my breath. My legs felt like jelly and my lungs burned. As the adrenaline faded, the full weight of what I'd discovered came crashing down on me. I sat in my car, shaking and hyperventilating as I tried to decide what to do. Should I call the police? Would they even believe such an insane story? What if they investigated and found nothing, tipping off the killer that someone knew about their activities? In the end, my fear won out. I started the car with trembling hands and sped away, constantly checking my rearview mirror to make sure I wasn't being followed. I was too scared to go to the authorities, worried that somehow the killer would find out and come after me next. That was 3 weeks ago. I haven't been able to sleep properly since. Every noise outside my window makes me jump. I keep reliving those terrifying moments in the cabin, wondering if I made the right choice by fleeing. The guilt of not reporting what I found eats away at me. But the fear of becoming the next victim paralyzes me with indecision. I don't know what to do. Part of me wants to go back with the police and show them what I discovered. But a bigger part is terrified that the killer is still out there watching and waiting. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Will I ever feel safe in the woods again? Will I ever be able to shake the feeling of being watched, even in my own home? All I know is that somewhere out in the forests of New Jersey, a cabin full of dark secrets still stands, and its occupant is still out there, hunting innocent hikers who have no idea of the danger lurking in the shadows. I only hope that by sharing my story, I can warn others to be cautious. If you're hiking in remote areas, always let someone know where you'll be. And if you stumble upon anything suspicious, don't make the same mistake I did. Notify the authorities immediately. The woods hold beauty and wonder, but as I learned that day, they can also conceal unimaginable horrors. Stay safe out there, fellow hikers. You never know who might be watching from the trees. It was early October, and I had decided to do one last solo backpacking trip before the weather turned too cold. I chose a remote area in northern Maine, wanting to really get away from it all and immerse myself in the autumn colors. After a full day of hiking, I found a small clearing a few hundred yards off the main trail that seemed perfect for setting up camp. As the sun began to set, I got my tent pitched and a small fire going. The evening was chilly but clear, with a bright half-moon rising above the trees. I heated up some trail dinner and sat by the fire, enjoying the quiet and solitude. Owls hooted in the distance, and a light breeze rustled through the leaves. It was peaceful, and I felt completely at ease. Around 10 p.m., I decided to turn in for the night. I doused the fire, brushed my teeth, and crawled into my sleeping bag. The temperature had dropped further, and I was glad for the extra warmth. As I was drifting off to sleep, I heard a twig snap somewhere in the woods. My eyes flew open, suddenly alert. Probably just a deer or something, I assured myself. But then I heard it again, closer this time. I unzipped the tent flap and peered out into the moonlit clearing. At first I didn't see anything unusual, but as my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I noticed a dark figure standing at the edge of the trees about 50 feet away. My heart started racing. It was clearly the shape of a person, but they weren't moving at all, just standing there, facing my tent. "Hello?" I called out hesitantly. No response. The figure remained motionless. "Is someone there?" I tried again, my voice shaking slightly. Still nothing. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold night air. Something about this didn't feel right at all. Normal hikers don't just silently appear in the middle of the night and stare at someone's tent. I debated what to do. Should I confront them? Try to scare them off? Pack up and leave? As I was weighing my options, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The figure had moved closer, maybe 10 feet, without me seeing or hearing them at all. They were now partially illuminated by the moonlight. It was definitely a man, tall and thin. He was dressed all in dark clothing and appeared to be wearing some kind of hood or hat that obscured his face. But the most unnerving thing was his posture. Ramrod straight, arms at his sides, completely motionless, just staring directly at me. I was frozen in fear, hardly daring to breathe. My mind raced through all the possibilities. Was this some kind of deranged killer? A ghost? Some sort of hallucination brought on by tainted trail mix? None of the explanations I could come up with were comforting. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few minutes, I decided I needed to do something. "Look, I don't want any trouble," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "There's nothing valuable here. Just please leave me alone." The figure didn't react at all, not even a slight movement or change in posture. It was as if he hadn't heard me at all, or as if he wasn't really there. But I knew he was. I could feel his gaze boring into me. I debated making a run for it, but quickly dismissed that idea. Even if I managed to get my tent packed up, I'd have to run right past him to get back to the trail, and there was no way I was going to turn my back on this creepy stranger. So I did the only thing I could think of. I zipped the tent back up, grabbed my pocket knife, and huddled in my sleeping bag, hardly daring to move. Sleep was out of the question. I lay there rigid with fear, straining my ears for any sound of movement outside. But there was nothing, just the usual nighttime forest sounds and my own pounding heartbeat. Every so often I would gather the courage to peek out of the tent, and every time the man was still there. Sometimes he had moved slightly closer, but always with the same unnaturally still posture, always staring directly at my tent. The night dragged on endlessly. I've never experienced such prolonged, intense fear before or since. Every noise made me flinch. My mind conjured up increasingly terrifying scenarios of what this man might do. I mentally kicked myself for not bringing a gun or at least bear spray. I had always felt so safe in the woods before. Now I felt like easy prey. As the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky, I allowed myself to feel a small measure of relief. Surely this nightmarish vigil would end with the coming of daylight. But when I peeked out again, my hopes were dashed. The man was still there, closer than ever now, maybe 20 feet from my tent. In the growing light, I could see more details of his appearance, but that only made things worse. His skin was pallid, almost gray. His eyes were sunken and had a glazed look, and his expression was completely, unnaturally blank. I knew I couldn't stay in the tent any longer. Fight or flight instinct had fully kicked in, and flight was winning out. I quickly pulled on my boots and jacket, grabbed my backpack, and burst out of the tent. I half expected the man to lunge at me, but he remained motionless. His dead eyes followed me as I edged around the clearing, giving him as wide a berth as possible. When I reached the edge of the woods, I broke into a run. I ran faster and harder than I ever have in my life, not even bothering to follow the trail. Branches whipped at my face and I stumbled over roots, but I didn't slow down. I just needed to put as much distance between myself and that clearing as possible. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes or so, I finally slowed to a stop, gasping for breath. I found myself on the shore of a small pond I didn't recognize. Leaning against a tree, I tried to collect my thoughts and calm my racing heart. What the hell had just happened? Who was that man? Why had he been watching me? As my breathing steadied, I realized I had left most of my gear back at the campsite in my panicked flight. But there was no way I was going back for it. I pulled out my phone, hoping to call for help, but of course there was no signal this deep in the woods. I would have to hike out on my own. It took me most of the day to find my way back to a marked trail and then to the trailhead where I had parked. I jumped at every sound, convinced that ghostly figure was going to appear again at any moment, but I made it back to my car without further incident. That was 3 months ago. I reported the experience to the park rangers, but they didn't find anything unusual when they went to check it out. My abandoned gear was still there, undisturbed. There was no sign that anyone else had been in the area. I've tried to rationalize what happened. Maybe it was some kind of hallucination brought on by exhaustion or dehydration. Maybe it was just an eccentric hiker with an odd sense of humor. But deep down, I know it was something more sinister than that, something beyond normal explanation. I still have nightmares about those dead eyes staring at me. I wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I'll see that figure standing at the foot of my bed. I don't know if I'll ever be able to go camping again. The woods that once brought me so much peace now fill me with dread. That one night of inexplicable terror has changed me forever. I just hope that whatever or whoever that was, it stays in those remote forests of Maine, far away from me. It was a crisp autumn morning when I set out on what was supposed to be a routine day hike. The trail was one I'd done many times before, a moderately challenging 8-mile loop with stunning views of the Shenandoah Valley. As I laced up my boots in the nearly empty trailhead parking lot, I felt that familiar excitement and peace that always came over me at the start of a hike. The first couple miles were uneventful. I maintained a steady pace, pausing occasionally to take in the vibrant fall foliage and snap a few photos. About an hour in, I rounded a bend and noticed another hiker heading towards me on the trail. He was a tall, wiry man who looked to be in his 40s, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, not exactly typical hiking attire. As we got closer, he flashed a wide grin and called out an enthusiastic greeting. "Beautiful day for a hike, isn't it?" he said as we met on the trail. I nodded and smiled politely, expecting to continue on my way. But the man stopped directly in front of me, blocking the narrow path. "I'm Dave," he said, thrusting out his hand. "Where you headed today?" Something about his overly friendly demeanor immediately set me on edge. In my experience, most hikers exchange quick pleasantries before moving on. This guy seemed intent on striking up a conversation. "Just doing the loop trail," I replied vaguely, shaking his hand briefly. "Have a good one." I tried to step around him, but he sidestepped to stay in front of me. "Mind if I join you for a bit? I'm new to the area and could use some company." Alarm bells were going off in my head, but I didn't want to seem rude or paranoid. "Thanks, but I prefer to hike alone," I said firmly. "Enjoy your hike." This time I managed to squeeze past him and continue up the trail, but to my dismay, I heard footsteps behind me. Dave had apparently decided to follow me anyway. "So, where are you from?" he called out. "You seem like you know these trails pretty well." I quickened my pace, hoping he'd get the hint. "Just passing through," I replied curtly over my shoulder. But Dave matched my increased speed, peppering me with more questions. Where was I staying? How long was I in town for? Did I hike here often? With each invasive query, my unease grew. After about 10 minutes of this, I stopped abruptly and turned to face him. "Look, I really just want to hike in peace. Please leave me alone." Dave held up his hands in a placating gesture, but there was something unsettling in his eyes. "Whoa, no need to get upset. I'm just being friendly. These woods can be dangerous, you know. Never know what kind of creeps you might run into out here." A chill ran down my spine at his words. Was that a threat? I decided it was time to abort my planned hike and get back to my car as quickly as possible. "I'm heading back now," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Please don't follow me." I turned and started walking swiftly back the way we'd come. To my horror, I heard Dave's footsteps behind me once again. "Don't be like that," he called out. "I'm just looking out for you. Hey, I've got some great trails I could show you if you're interested. Real secluded spots most people don't know about." My heart was pounding now. I picked up my pace to a jog, no longer caring if I seemed rude or paranoid. Dave's footsteps quickened too. "Where are you going in such a hurry?" he shouted, his tone taking on an angry edge. "I thought we were becoming friends." I broke into a run, my heavy backpack jostling painfully against my shoulders. I could hear Dave running behind me, getting closer. Panic threatened to overwhelm me as I realized he was faster than me. Up ahead, I spotted a fork in the trail. Making a split-second decision, I veered right onto a steeper, rockier path. I was gambling that Dave's inappropriate footwear would slow him down on the more difficult terrain. "Hey!" he yelled. "Where do you think you're going? Get back here!" I didn't dare look back, focusing all my energy on navigating the treacherous trail as quickly as possible. My lungs burned and my legs ached, but raw fear propelled me forward. I could hear Dave cursing and stumbling behind me. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few minutes, I risked a glance over my shoulder. To my immense relief, Dave had fallen behind significantly. His jean-clad legs were clearly ill-suited for the steep, rocky incline. I pressed on, my legs trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. When I reached the top of the ridge, I veered off the trail into a dense stand of trees. I crouched behind a large boulder, trying to quiet my ragged breathing as I listened intently for any sign of pursuit. Long minutes ticked by. I heard Dave's voice in the distance, calling out for me, but it gradually faded away. Still, I remained frozen in place, terrified he might double back and find me. I'm not sure how long I stayed hidden there. It felt like hours. Eventually, I worked up the courage to creep back towards the main trail. My legs were shaking so badly I could barely walk. I made it back to the trailhead without any further sign of Dave. But I didn't feel safe until I was in my car with the doors locked, speeding away from the parking lot. In the days since, I've struggled to process what happened. I filed a report with the park rangers, but without any concrete evidence of a crime, there wasn't much they could do. They promised to keep an eye out for anyone matching Dave's description, but I know the chances of him being caught are slim. The experience has shaken me to my core. Hiking has always been my escape, my way of finding peace and solitude in nature. Now, I find myself jumping at every snapping twig, seeing potential threats in every passing hiker. I can't stop thinking about what might have happened if I hadn't managed to get away. The look in Dave's eyes, the menacing undertone to his words, I'm convinced he meant to do me harm. The thought makes me physically ill. I've always considered myself a cautious hiker, but this encounter has forced me to reevaluate everything. I'm not sure when or if I'll feel comfortable hitting the trails alone again. The sense of freedom and safety I once felt in the wilderness has been shattered. For now, I'm sticking to busy, well-populated hiking areas and never going out without a hiking buddy and multiple means of communication. I'm hyper-vigilant about my surroundings, always on guard for any sign of danger. I know logically that what happened to me was a rare occurrence. The vast majority of hikers and outdoor enthusiasts are good people who look out for one another. But it only takes one encounter with someone like Dave to forever change your perspective. I'm sharing my story as a warning to others, especially solo hikers. Trust your instincts. If someone's behavior seems off, don't worry about being polite. Protect yourself. Always let someone know your planned route and expected return time. Carry a means of self-defense and communication. The outdoors should be a place of joy and rejuvenation, not fear. I'm determined not to let this experience rob me of my love for hiking. But I'll never again take my safety for granted on the trail. The monsters we need to fear aren't always hiding in the woods. Sometimes they walk right up and introduce themselves with a smile. I was so excited for our hiking trip on the Appalachian Trail in Vermont. My best friend Karen and I had been planning it for months, a chance to get away from the stress of our jobs and enjoy nature for a few days. We set out early on a crisp fall morning, the air filled with the scent of pine and fallen leaves. The trail wound through beautiful forests ablaze with autumn colors. For the first few hours, everything was perfect. Karen and I chatted and laughed as we hiked, catching up on each other's lives and pointing out interesting plants and rock formations along the way. Around midday, we stopped for lunch near a babbling stream. The sound of the water was so soothing. We found a nice flat rock to sit on while we ate our sandwiches. That's when things started to get weird. Karen got up to refill her water bottle in the stream. As she was crouched by the water, she suddenly went very still and quiet. At first, I thought maybe she had seen an interesting bug or something. But after a minute or two of her not moving, I started to get worried. "Hey, Karen, you okay over there?" I called out. She didn't respond or even turn around. I stood up and walked over to her, leaves crunching under my boots. When I got closer, I saw that her eyes were wide open and glazed over, staring blankly at the water. A chill ran down my spine. I put my hand on her shoulder. "Karen, what's wrong?" She blinked rapidly and shook her head, as if coming out of a trance. When she looked up at me, there was something off about her expression. Her eyes darted around wildly, and she had an unsettling grin on her face. "Oh, hi there," she said in an oddly cheerful voice. "Ready to keep hiking?" I helped her up, trying to shake off my unease. Sure. You feeling all right?" "Never better," she chirped, slinging her backpack on. As we continued down the trail, Karen's behavior got progressively stranger. She kept up a constant stream of manic chatter, talking about random topics that made no sense. Her movements were jerky and erratic. She'd veer off the path to inspect trees or rocks, muttering to herself. I tried to keep things normal, making casual conversation, but Karen barely seemed to hear me. She'd interrupt with bizarre non sequiturs or laugh at inappropriate moments. A knot of dread was forming in my stomach. What the hell was happening to my friend? About an hour later, we came to a fork in the trail. I pulled out the map to check which way to go. As I was looking it over, Karen suddenly grabbed my arm, digging her fingers in painfully. "They're watching us," she hissed, her eyes wild. "Can't you feel them? We have to keep moving." I tried to pull away, but her grip was like iron. "Karen, you're hurting me. Let go." She released me and stumbled back, a look of confusion passing over her face. For a moment, I saw a flicker of my old friend there. But then her expression hardened again. "Don't leave me," she said in a low, menacing voice. "You can't leave me out here alone." I'm not going to leave you," I stammered. "Let's just take a break, okay? Have some water and a snack." Karen's mood shifted again and she nodded eagerly. "Oh yes, a snack sounds lovely." We sat down on a fallen log and I handed her a granola bar. As she unwrapped it, I surreptitiously texted my boyfriend to let him know something was wrong. I kept my phone angled away so Karen couldn't see. While she ate, I tried to casually assess her condition. Her skin was pale and clammy, and there were dark circles under her eyes that I hadn't noticed before. She kept twitching and looking around nervously. I wondered if she could be having some kind of psychotic break. But how could it have come on so suddenly? "How are you feeling?" I asked gently. "You seem a little off. Did something happen back at the stream?" Karen's head snapped towards me, her eyes narrowing. "What do you mean, off?" "I feel fine, better than fine. I can see everything so clearly now." A chill ran through me at her words. "What do you mean you can see everything?" She leaned in close, her breath hot on my face. "The trees have eyes," she whispered, "and they're all looking at us. Can't you feel it? We're being watched, judged." I leaned away, my heart pounding. "Karen, you're scaring me. I think maybe we should head back to the trailhead and get you checked out." "No," she shouted, jumping to her feet. "We can't go back. They won't let us leave. We have to keep going deeper." She started pacing manically, muttering to herself and gesticulating wildly. I stood up slowly, not wanting to make any sudden movements. Okay, I said in what I hoped was a soothing tone. "We don't have to go back, but maybe we should set up camp early and get some rest." Karen whirled to face me, her eyes blazing. "You want to stop? You want to just sit here and let them get us?" "No, we have to keep moving. Come on." She grabbed my arm and started dragging me down the trail. I tried to dig my heels in, but she was freakishly strong. Branches whipped at my face as she pulled me along. "Karen, stop!" I yelled. "You're hurting me." She let go abruptly and I stumbled, falling to my knees. When I looked up, Karen was standing perfectly still, her back to me. A gust of wind rustled through the trees, sending a shower of leaves spiraling around us. The forest suddenly felt oppressively quiet. Slowly, Karen turned to face me. But the person staring back at me wasn't my friend anymore. Her eyes were completely black, like empty voids. Her skin had a sickly greenish tinge. When she opened her mouth to speak, I saw rows of sharp, pointed teeth. "Karen's not here anymore." The thing wearing my friend's face growled in an impossibly deep voice. "You shouldn't have come to these woods. Now you'll never leave." I scrambled backwards, leaves and dirt sticking to my palms. This couldn't be real. I had to be hallucinating or dreaming or something. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying that when I opened them, everything would be back to normal. But when I looked again, the creature was still there. It took a step towards me, head cocked at an unnatural angle. I wanted to run, but my legs felt like lead. Just as the thing lunged at me, there was a blinding flash of light. I threw my arms up to shield my eyes. When the spots cleared from my vision, Karen was gone, vanished into thin air. I sat there in shock for I don't know how long, trying to process what had just happened. Eventually, I managed to gather my wits enough to call for help on my phone. When the rescue team found me, I was babbling incoherently about monsters in the woods. They searched for Karen for days, but never found a trace of her. I tried to tell them what happened, but of course no one believed me. They decided she must have wandered off and gotten lost, probably due to some kind of mental break. It's been 2 years now, and I still have nightmares about that day. I've gone over it 1,000 times in my head, trying to make sense of it. Was it all just a shared hallucination brought on by tainted water or some kind of toxic plant? Did we stumble into some kind of supernatural hotspot? Or am I the one who snapped and imagined the whole thing? I don't know if I'll ever have answers. All I know is that something took my best friend that day. Something dark and ancient that lurks in those woods, waiting for unwary hikers to wander into its domain. I'll never set foot on that trail again, and I can't shake the feeling that someday, somehow, it's going to come for me too.